Chief Southern Command's Ready Reaction Force, which was, again, a very unusual thing for me to be privy to, because I was commanding a company as a first lieutenant, just barely outranking the young officers under my command. And it was a company that was typically given only to senior captains, guys that were 7 years senior to me, because I hadn't even been made a captain yet. So I commanded as a first lieutenant for a few months and made captain, and there I was. And later, I was pulled out of that job when it came time to give it up before I went to the advanced course, and I went back to this general that I had worked with before then, because he was now rapidly rising four-star general, General Fred Warner. And at that time, I got to grow with him traveling through Central and South America, because he was the U.S. military's expert, military and diplomatic expert on the war in El Salvador and, the growing tensions in Nicaragua and other places. And I got to be everywhere, again, as a young officer, standing in, seeing how chief of stations, how ambassadors, how the mill group commanders, and I saw a lot of things, and they were not positive, and they sort of kind of twisted my head around, because I was seeing things, for example, just stuff that happened. I'll just briefly throw it out to you. It's like, here I am standing there just being a sponge again, and I'm listening, and I hear this dialogue going on between my general, Ambassador Dean Hinton, who was the U.S. ambassador to El Salvador during the war, and the cardinal who was there, and the chief of station, who was the CIA director there, and then mill group commander, who was U.S. Army colonel there. I think he was a colonel, might have been a lieutenant colonel. But what they were doing was they were rehearsing their script for how they were going to manipulate the Salvadorian president and other political leaders there. So it was right on down to, he likes to drink this kind of thing. And so, George, if you go get that and bring that to him, then Paul will come up and follow. And then, Ringo will say something else. And, there it went. It was just the craziest thing. They just talked about manipulating everything that was going to happen at this embassy party in order to steer the political leadership of El Salvador in the direction that the U.S. was trying to steer them. So anyway, that was just a big experience, that it happened repetitively. And I also, ended up on one of the flights that took place down in Argentina. That's another story. Somebody asked that question later. But I left there, went off to the advanced course, and then came to the First Ranger Battalion. When I came to the First Ranger Battalion, I was initially the assistant S3 battalion, Major Wersing. Later, became a company right away, which was not something that typically happened. And the battalion actor, Jack Nix, came over to me and said, "Hey, look, Colonel Taylor wants to give you Charlie Company, but hey, Steve wants to carry in here for 18 months in the one position." And he goes, "Would you do a real favor here and say you'll take the S1 position and let Steve go to the Charlie Company, because otherwise it'd be irreparable." So I said, "Yeah, I'll tell you this one, no problem." I first had to watch what was going on anyway for a while before I took down the company. So I ended up taking command above me 13 months later, and commander 2 years. Like him, Air Rifle Company 2 years, and I ended up commanding a company for 2 years. And that was very rare, because most commanders only got 12 months at all. And most company commanders only got 1 company. So I was way ahead of my peer group in terms of just command time and troop time. And once Ranger commander, my company did better and better and better and better. I had this amazing combination of young officers and young non-officers that everything I thought was smart, wise about training that I put out, they just like hatched and made it perfect. So it wasn't me, it was really them. And I was so impressed by them. It sometimes chokes me not to think about these men and what they were capable of doing. But the company began to get noticed, and so the Ranger Regimental Commander noticed the company, and there came a time where he had to pick from 3 battalions. He had to pick a company to go to the Middle East to represent. Pretty rotund woman by the name of Jeannie opens it up. She's the wife of a colonel, and she's the secretary of this place. And she opens it up, and oh, hey, doctor, so and so, it's good to see you, and brings me inside. And first thing I notice is I look across this old green army carpet. At the wall, on the far side of the wall, is a giant galaxy painted. It's black. It's like black paint put on the wall, and then there's a galaxy painted on the wall. And I thought, well, shit, that's nothing. That's not something you see in a military organization, in a military unit. Most of the time, you go into some place and it's got pictures of, tanks or planes or guns or whatever you do, whatever it happens to be. But a galaxy painted on the wall, it was just so unusual to me to see that. And so I'm actually brought around by Jeannie and introduced to all the people, this cast of characters in this organization, while the doctor goes in to speak to the branch chief about me. So the first guy I meet is Mel Riley. And Mel Riley, these were the days when you could smoke in the buildings, and, the room that Mel Riley, Angelo Della Fiore, and Robin Dahlgren were in, it had like a 4-foot layer of smoke from the ceiling down. And so you kind of had to duck your head unless you wanted to go through that. So I'm looking down, and as I meet Mel Riley, he has a huge piece of brain-tanned deer hide on his desk, and he has this huge assortment of beads, and he is sewing this intricate, beautiful beadwork onto this piece of brain-tanned hide. I didn't know it was brain-tanned hide until he explained to me what that was later on, but I'm just sharing that with you. And to the right or left of Angela and Robin, and both of them had black, nothing on their desk, but these black tablecloths on their desks, and both of them are playing tarot cards. I mean, they're not playing, but doing tarot cards. And I just thought, holy shit, what is this? I mean, I've never seen anything like this. This is not something you see every day. Then I went out, I met Lynn Buchanan. He was standing in his stocking feet, which that was how he always worked. I met Gabrielle Pettingale. I met Ed Dames. I never met Paul Smith. I met, that was it. And then later I was brought in to meet Fern Gavin, who was the branch chief. He now passed away, but Fern was sitting in there, and he said, you know what, I've heard your story. The doctors told me about you. And he goes, I'm always impressed that there are young officers willing to give everything up to come and be here. And I thought, give everything up? What are you talking about? Give everything up. I said, I don't really know what you do here, but I have just been reading some stuff and been shown some stuff, and I'm intrigued, but I don't know what it is you do here, and I don't know if I'm willing to give anything up to be here. And he just folded his hands in front of his face, and he said, well, what we do here, young man, is we train individuals to transcend space and time, to view persons, places, or things remote in space and time, and to gather and report intelligence information on the same. And we would like you to be one of us. Yeah, well, I felt like my butt hit the floor sitting in the chair when he said that. And I found myself going, I'd love to be here. So long story short now, shorter, when I went back to the unit, to Royal Cape, people were really pissed off because they thought they were going to have me for like 3-4 years in that unit as a deputy XO. And now I'm sitting going, no, I want to go to this unit. I want to go to this remote viewing unit. I want to be part of that thing. I want to learn that and do that. And every person there who outranked me said, you do not understand what you're getting yourself involved in. This is an organization of nothing but misfits and ne'er-do-wells. And you're never going to shake this off. You're never going to be able to get out of that after you get in it. Don't do it, okay? They even made an appointment for me to go meet General Weinstein, the 3-star intelligence, military intelligence general, who had oversight for this particular organization. And he brought me in. He drank Diet Pepsis like by 24 packs. And his trash can's filled with them. He's finishing one off, popping a new one, got both feet up on the desk, which is how he briefed people. And he looks at me and he goes, now, I know that people have told you not to go do this. He said, but you're actually going to be working for the CIA. And you're going to be working for the CIA, attached to the DIA, and working for the NSA. And he goes, and the CIA is nothing but the largest organization of misfits, liars, and fucking freaks. That's exactly what he said, that you are ever going to meet in your life. And you're stupid if you're going to go do that, given what your background is and what your OERs say and what you're probably going to be. He goes, I've got your OERs right here. He goes, I've never seen a young officer have two general officers put in his OERs that you're going to be a general officer. One of them says, the 4-star general says you're going to be chief of staff of the Army one day. The 2-star general says, will be, destined to wear stars, will be a general. He goes, now you want to go over to this place and do this thing? And I really struggled with what to say and how to say it. But there was something about this place that just intrigued me beyond because of what had happened in the desert. And I had to find out the answer to that. And I said, I have to do this, sir. I just have to do it. So,
David, that's a perfect chance. I'm going to let your voice rest really quick and do a quick room reset. And the room's filling up now, so I want to make sure that everybody is brought up to speed on who you are, what we're talking about. And I think that's a perfect spot, given this seems to be your initiation into the program. And just make sure everyone is on the same page really quick. So everybody, this is Nate Night Talks. Tonight we have Dr. David Morehouse, and the room title is Dr. David Morehouse, Remote Viewing UFOs in Consciousness. He's been giving a very detailed and amazing background on his intro into the military. I guess you'd say it was a full 20 years, right? That you ended up serving. You did a career.
I did.
Yeah.
Actually,
career term.
I resigned at 18 years, but I was reinstated later.
So career started off in the Army Rangers, worked his way up through a tremendous amount of accolades, breaking records and doing things that very few people have ever done to rise to the ranks and do things at such a young age that truly allowed him to excel. I'm paraphrasing a lot, but we need to do that. During essentially a mission in Jordan, was shot in the head and knocked out. Roughly, his helmet saved his life for about 30 minutes. And during that period of time, encountered, in his own words, a guide who essentially delivered some messages to him that ultimately ended up changing the trajectory of his life and led him ultimately to where we're kind of at within the story at this point, which is him walking away from a incredibly successful and upward mobility career, where people said that he would be wearing stars if he continued on his path, and ended up going into, due to this traumatic injury that happened and this experience that he couldn't shake, and future encounters that happened with other entities, if you will, and kind of altered states of consciousness that came out of it, ended up joining essentially the CIA. That is where we are at right now within the story. And for those of you who've been around Nate Night Talks and been within the past rooms, we've done essentially the 3-parter on the Gateway experience, which ultimately all had to do with remote viewing, astral projection. This is kind of what we're getting into. Dr. Morehouse is going to clarify things within the Monroe Institute protocol and HemiSync as it pertains to it actually not being a part of the program itself. But definitely want, if we can from here, just clarify when you pick up from the story, for everyone to know who's not familiar with Project Stargate, as well as the U.S. interest within remote viewing, astral projection, and the heat that was put on us because of the Russians dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into this type of program, that the U.S. was playing catch up in the 70s and initiated the help of the Stanford Research Institute to initiate essentially the first experiments with remote viewers, and everything kind of springboarded from there. And so I guess a good thing to possibly go from here, as it dovetails with your story, if you can find a way to work it in so everybody understands Project Stargate in general, as well as the Gateway experience and your kind of take on that, just so everybody knows the backstory and how incredibly seriously our government in the most clandestine ways was taking this. That it is not a pseudoscience, it's nothing woo-woo, it is incredibly real, and everybody ultimately possesses the ability to do that. And so, as everybody in the room knows who comes in here all the time, everything boils down to consciousness. That is the whole point of everything that we're talking about, especially as it pertains to the UFO phenomena and psychedelics. And so we're going to dive in deeper within this story. I just want to make sure everybody's brought up to speed. We are holding off questions until later, because I do want to make sure that Dr. Morehouse has a chance to really go into detail. His story is absolutely phenomenal. His pedigree in this space is very detailed, and very incredible. He's author of 4 different books. And as we're going to continue to learn as far as his history within this subject, he has a tremendous amount of experience in these, I guess we can say, altered states of consciousness, if you will, and remote viewing in general. And then we'll segue from that into his contact with extraterrestrials, the UFO phenomena, how it all relates, and keep the conversation going. But want to make sure that everybody who is in now is brought up to speed. We will be doing questions later. There are some people who are on stage, but once again, hold your questions. Happy to have you up here. But right now it is about the man of the hour, as we are all very interested to hear everything he has to say. And so going forward, I guess, like I said, pick up kind of where you left off, if you could, but within that, if you could give a little backstory so people understand as you're getting into this program, Project Stargate, Gateway experience, and everything there in a little more detail. Perfect. Thank you.
So I show up at Fort Meade, Maryland for my, I'm still living on Fort Belvoir. And so I show up at Fort Meade, Maryland, and I walk into the unit, and I'm read on fully to the organization. And this is when I find out that some of the things that I saw back when I was a ranger, like stuff about the 1st Earth Battalion, the 1st Earth Battalion manual, all this stuff that, this Ron Johnson bullshit book that was written, and the stupid movie that George Clooney produced. Funny stuff, but had absolutely nothing to do with what Jim Channon was doing or what the Delta Force Concept think tank group was doing. To just set the stage on that, this was all stuff. Remote viewing came out of this same era, and that was the post-Vietnam era. And so during that time, we had a number of things that were ongoing. I mean, you had things like, the Boyd cycle being turned into the OTA loop. You had, the U.S. Air Force studying how a guy sees to the other side of the moment so that he is able to observe, orient, decide, and act what an enemy pilot is going to do before they even do it. And how can that happen? But Lieutenant Colonel John Boyd, at the time Captain Boyd, was being studied by the Air Force. The guy never lost a air-to-air engagement, real or simulated, ever. So they wanted to find out what made this guy's brain tick. How was he able to do this? And, the general conclusions were the guy is able to see outside of right now. He's able to do that. And they couldn't really understand how he was able to do that. But that kind of stuff was falling into what the military was kind of looking at. The Delta Force concept papers that discuss the Delta Force think tanks, the Delta Force, not the Delta Force like, not green, not CAG, not CAG is Combat Applications Group. That's what Delta is now. The Delta Force concept paper it was a think tank that was developed that had a lot of high-ranking military officers. It had a lot of high-ranking civilians and a lot of civilian contractors brought in. And the mission of this think tank was to define what the military in general was going to be post-Vietnam, because it had to reinvent itself. First of all, it was going to be an all-volunteer force for the first time in the history of the country. It was going to be a volunteer force. So how were they going to attract people? What were they going to do? Especially in light of, the misery and and what happened with Vietnam. So that's where this stuff came in. And the 1st Earth Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Channon, who was indeed a Special Forces guy, but he was bringing forth all of these concepts that they were briefing on. And so the 1st Earth Battalion concept and the Delta Force concept, all of these were real, and they were very serious. I mean, there may have been parts of them that could be grinned at, but they were serious people doing serious work in trying to define how are we going to reinvent the military services of the United States so that they are indeed services for the people of the United States and not just great consumers of commodity for the United States. So that was all big, serious stuff. Well, while all of this is going on, other things start to get looked at. So Helms, who's at the time the director of the CIA in 72, gets a briefing that says, well, the Czechs, the Chinese, the Soviets, the Germans, we think the Israelis and maybe the UK are all heavily involved in the study of the paranormal, and they're using it as a potential intelligence collection methodology. Really, says Helms. Is that really what they're doing? Well, do we know anything about it? Do we have a parallel program? Are we doing something like that? Which, if you understand how the agency operates, you will understand that that's not an unusual question for a director to ask. He has no idea absolutely everything that's happening beneath him in that organization. It's a compartmental organization. There are some things that he will know about. There are some things he will never know about. There are some things that agency is doing that no president will ever know about. They just won't tell him. They won't feel impressed to do that at all. So, although also those of you who are UFO aficionados will understand that that is also true, that whoever is over that has absolutely no legal obligation to inform the President of the United States about it completely. And they don't, and they won't. So that's kind of where it sits. And that's why every president who steps in, from Clinton to Obama that I know of, and I don't know if Trump did or not, all claim that they're going to get to the bottom of this thing, and then they never do. And we can't figure out why that is. The reason it is because in the intelligence services of our nation, right or wrong, and with all other nations, these people control information, and they choose or feel that they can just turn around and go, no, when asked a question like that. No. Why their answer will be is because presidents come and go, governments come and go. But the truth of what we're working with and dealing with, that is here for us to stay and stick with, and not for us just to inform some guy who may be in the job for 4 years and then goes away, right? That's their rationale for it. But all these things were happening, and when Helms asked that question about the study of the paranormal, they said no. And he said, well, I want a program. He goes, but I want it done correctly. I want it validated in science. Don't just go get the Madame LeBlancs, don't go get me a bunch of, alleged natural gifted psychics and put them in a room and have them do something. No. I want you to hire somebody that can research this, and they need to accomplish these things. They need to tell us whether or not it's real. So in other words, validate it. They need to tell us what individuals have a proclivity for it and who does not, so that we can know how to recruit people. And we need to know, can they replicate it? In other words, can they train it to people? So those three things were the primary questions that were asked by the CIA as they put this out for bid. And it was put out for bid. And SRI, the RAND group, and several other laboratories chimed in and tried to get the contract. Well, the CIA liked Stanford Research Institute International in Palo Alto, not part of Stanford University. They're an independent research group. Detractors like to point that out. I just pointed out to you to make very clear that they aren't, but they are an independent research group of scientists, physicists and beyond, biologists, physicists, chemists, everything, a full spectrum, full service organization. And the CIA so liked their take on it that the CIA wrote a sole source justification document to put SRI in the driver's seat to have them do this work. So circa 73, upwards of into the 80s, they were involved in the study of this, calling upon all the greatest natural gifted, free world psychics that they could get their hands on. They grabbed people like Uri Geller, Ingo Swann, Pat Price, a host of others. Some of them they continue to work with and use. Some of them they said, thank you very much for your participation. Goodbye. They also called in a bunch of different motivational speakers. Those of you that, if you follow Tony Robbins has taught, not only did he endorse the book called Remote Viewing, The Complete User's Guide to Coordinate Remote Viewing, he also stood up on stage multiple times and claims to have been tested, to have consulted with, and to have worked with SRI back during that time. And I used to think, well, nah, that's bull. You didn't do that. But then in retrospect, and looking at the client list that were brought in the initial interviews and testing and questioning, he was there. I'm sure he was there. So they pulled together their training protocols. They pulled together their experimentation protocols. They did what every contractor has to do, which is produce end-of-month reports to the CIA. They had to do quarterly reports. They had to do annual reports to the CIA. And the CIA wanted their scientific methodology audited. So they went to one of their competitors, RAND, and said, we want you guys to audit these guys. So if you have interest in looking at the history of remote viewing from that perspective, that crap is all out there, because you will see the audit agency's reports back to the CIA about how well the SRI was doing, back and forth. And a couple times, they split hairs with each other and arguments ensued. And those arguments continue to this day. And I'm sure that there's some professional, competition going there. I'm sure the guys that didn't get the contract were pissed off that they were now just being given the ask to audit the guys who did get the sole source contract, because it was a huge contract that went on for years and years and years and years. But the big report came back, in IEEE March 1976, in the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, which is the equivalent of being published in the AMA if you're a physician. They have put their first report forward in unclassified terms. Remember that, which meant that they couldn't say everything that they were doing, and they couldn't be completely truthful about the results of what they were doing. That said, you have 16 physicists, names and pictures in this article in IEEE March 1976 saying that it's called remote sensory perception, saying that, hey, we have been testing, we have been looking, we have been doing this. They didn't say they were doing it for the CIA, but hey, we know that people can, using just their own inherent abilities, an ability inherent to every human being, that they can follow this protocol and they can see distant in space-time and gather and collect information in this way. And here are our results, and here's our p-values and blah, blah, blah. So it is that kind of a report. It's got some disinformation in it. Why? Because we're in the midst of the Cold War. And anytime anybody like SRI publishes something, especially knowing that the Soviet Union and China and others are doing the very same thing, they're not going to tell the truth about everything they put in there. Why? Because they don't.
Dave, what was the name of that report?
So it's spy versus spy.
What was the name of that report, just so we can...
IEEE. It's the IEEE magazine, March 1976.
Gotcha.
It's got a green cover. Yep. Okay. All right. So that is the first formal report that goes out to the free world that describes remote sensory perception. Now, what are the key things that all of you listening need to come out of this with? Simply this. Was it validated? Yes, it was validated. And the results were audited, and the protocols used were audited. So it wasn't just one group coming to a bunch of, wanted, or believers, want-to-be believers in the CIA. This was developed by science, inspected and audited by science. It was proven in science, not in some, back room past a beaded curtain by some starry-eyed New Age guru. It was built in science and tested in science and developed in science. What about the question of who has a proclivity for this? What they actually determined was that it's an ability inherent to every human being. It's not unique to me. You don't have to get shot in the head. It's not unique to Joe McMonagle, who was also shot at one time and also had a heart attack. It's not unique. You don't have to have some traumatic physical or traumatic spiritual or some traumatic emotional experience to open these conduits into the unconscious. We all have this. We are born with this ability. And that's an important concept that I want you all to capture right now, that you are born with this ability. You may recognize it. You may not recognize it. Doesn't matter to me. The issue is you're born with the ability. That means that we're placed upon this earth with a requirement to, as Swedish physicists or Swedish pediatricians say, who have also published multiple times about what they believe children are born with. They believe children are born with the ability to see perfectly. And when they do that, when they explained that to me years ago, they have palm to palm and their hands vertical, and they open up. They open up their upper hand and go, they see perfectly. I go, what do you mean by that? Well, they see perfectly. They know where they came from. They know why they're here. They still have that connection and that contact. And I said, so they stop having that connection and that contact because it's trained out of them, right? And they go, absolutely right. Everything about the world in which we put them does not nurture it, does not encourage it, does not recognize it. It's the same thing. Even if they are involved in religion or whatever, it's like the chaplain, the battalion chaplain, Ranger battalion chaplain. First time I talked to him about something like that, it was bullshit. You looked at me like I was a weirdo. Don't repeat that again, he says. So we're born into this life with an expectation, with an understanding that we are supposed to see perfectly, that we are supposed to keep this connection open to the cosmos. It's supposed to be there. It's part of us. We're supposed to see like the orca whale, sees, which has got, it scans at a hertz rate that is something like 50 times what even a dolphin has the capability of scanning at. And so those who, like Paul Eaton, who's a friend of mine who studies the orca whale, says they see perfectly because they see through everything. They see beyond the way at which they scan. We believe that it just pulls apart everything. So they actually see the emotion, the intellect, the heart, the mind of their prey and everything around them, which is how they connect with each other in their pods. It's a matriarchal society, a matriarchal organization, not patriarchal, not for orca whales, which that tells you a lot, doesn't it? So they connect in that way. And so these lines were being drawn amongst these pediatricians and people researching, other lives going, wow, yes, there's a connection here. Human beings have this ability like they do, like these animals do. Human beings have that ability. So that was a powerful thing that came out of that. And there was a protocol developed. Now, I want to be clear on this. In the development of this protocol, guys like Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff and others that were there were not remote viewers. They were scientists exploring this human ability. It's unfortunate that in their mind they started to come up with these, how to do it kinds of things, particularly Russell Targ, who thinks I overcomplicate things, by the way, just to be honest. He speaks as though he was a trained remote viewer. He never was. Never once did a remote viewing exercise as a psychic spy for the U.S. government. Did not do that. So he was a researcher and a tester. And Ingo Swann, who is a friend of mine, he's passed away now, but I spent a lot of time in the Bowery of New York in his brownstone, talking with him about remote viewing and listening to him telling me stories about the days that they were being tested at SRI. And he said he just used to want to hit, Russell in the head with a hammer. That was Ingo. Wanted to hit Russell in the head with a hammer because Russell wouldn't listen to him because Ingo Swann wanted to articulate a 6-stage of coordinate remote viewing. Ingo Swann coined the term coordinate remote viewing. Ingo Swann developed the 6 stages of coordinate remote viewing, and he required it at SRI for them to develop that and to test it and to teach it, much to their chagrin. They did not want to do that, but he insisted on it. So what actually came out of SRI once their work was done in doing it, which they continued to do different testing and evaluation of things up into well into the 80s, as did the RAND. But what was going on, and SAIC, that was one of the other auditing agencies, is once it was handed off to the CIA, the coordinate remote viewing, the 6-stage coordinate remote viewing, is what was instituted as an intelligence collection methodology. Not anything Pat Price did, not anything that anybody else did, including Uri Geller, who's a friend. All these things were like the start point. They were the, can humans do this, and can we try to understand it through them? So Russell Targ is all about doing things like, well, guess what's in my pocket, or what's in the box sitting on the table. That's not remote viewing. That's some other thing. That's like a parlor trick to me. That's how I define that. And I mean, yeah, I get it. But when somebody calls up on the remote viewing forum and says, well, you know what? I remote view all the time. Really? What do you do? Well, I call up my friend and I say, hey, you're wearing blue boxers right now, aren't you? And he goes, yeah. Okay, that's remote viewing, right? No, that's not remote viewing. That's some minor perturbation up into the unconscious where you have a perception of something and then you call to get it validated. What you don't do is you don't tell me how many times you call up and said you had blue boxers on. He went, no. So you're just giving me some example of a success and saying that's remote viewing. It's not remote viewing. Remote viewing, it starts with coordinate remote viewing. It goes to extended remote viewing. Then there's thought incubation. Those 3 main functional
Could you
areas.
briefly, really quick?
I'll talk to you about
Okay, I can say, can you briefly just summarize each of those?
I will. Yep, I'll get to that. Coordinate remote viewing is a 6-stage process. It has a very defined lexicon, okay? And it has a very defined dogma protocol or structure, as remote viewers refer to it. Stage 1 is you take the coordinates. I'll go through from top to bottom. You fill out a heading. It includes a start time and an ending time, which you leave blank. You declare advanced visuals. You declare any inclemencies that you may have prior to that. You go to what is called the receipt of coordinate position to the left-hand side of the page. You put your pen tip down there, and you wait for someone to give you the coordinates. The coordinates are 2 sets of 4 numbers, which are random numbers. The random number set is assigned by the individual assigning that particular concept of that target. So in the CIA, somebody says, hey, I want you to tell us what happened here then. That becomes the concept. That's the tasking. Then a program manager looks at that tasking and has to create a concept of that target. So if that's the tasking, what happened here when? He has to develop a concept, and he has to be very focused, and he has to be able to hold that thought in his head as he assigns 2 sets of 4 numbers for it. But once he does that, that is an energetic lock. That's a frequency lock. He has taken a tasking from a client, a customer, the CIA in this case, that's very specific in what it's asking. He creates a concept of that target and then assigns those coordinates. A monitor will probably not know what those coordinates represent. That's a blind. The double blind is the viewer has absolutely no idea what those target coordinates mean. Now, monitors were only used by most viewers until viewers became fully operational. I'll get back to the protocol in a minute. And once the viewer was fully operational, meaning they had X number of training targets, they scored at X number of levels of accuracy, sustained. They knew what their, what the the sine wave was of their performance, whether they were going up, whether they were going down, you were deemed an operational viewer. And then you still had to do training targets. So a typical viewer would do 166 training targets a year, plus 187, 237 or more operational targets per year, depending on what was being asked. An operational target was a real spy target, going after something that the government wanted you to go after. The rest of the time, they were training and calibrating you. So when you receive those coordinates, you respond autonomically, not automatically, autonomically with an ideogram. An ideogram is defined as the first graphic representation of the target site. And there are classic ideograms. I teach them, but I tell students, I don't care what you come up with. The ideogram could be a flat line across. I don't care. And it could still be a structure or a mountain or a land-water interface or water or something else or life form. Just because your ideogram is flat across doesn't mean anything to me. In the old days, you were taught that whatever you declassified or decoded your ideogram to be, usually typically was expected to follow a classic ideogram and how that looks. So let's just go back to you respond with an ideogram. You then decode the A component. The A component is simply dragging your pen tip across the ideogram and describing what it feels like to you. Close your eyes and pull it across there. It could be flat across in the sketch, in the ideogram, but it could, as you are dragging your pen across, you could feel as though it's rising or falling or dropping off or looping. I mean, it comes to you differently as you just close your eyes and start decoding it. Then you decode the B component of the ideogram. And then you decode the C component of the ideogram. When you're done decoding the ABC component of the ideogram, you move into stage 2s. Textures, colors, temperatures, sounds, tastes, smells, energetics, dimensionals. Those are the categories of information that you're looking for. So you're prompting yourself, what kinds of dimensionals are here? Prompting yourself, what kind of energetics are here? Now, what kind of smells, what kind of sounds, what kind of tastes, right? All these things are functional areas relating to a particular target, and you will struggle with them at first because you're trying to figure out what your modality of perception is. Some viewers are visual and auditory, and which is me. Other viewers want to be visual, but they're not. They end up being, some other primary modality. Some of them are digital. Some of them are tactile. Some of them are, other things that are in there. You can be whatever kind of viewer you want to be. It's simply a restatement of your intention and practice. If you want to be more visual, then ask for more visuals. Make that your intention and work toward that. It's not just because you say, well, I want to be visual, that you suddenly become visual. If that's not how you start off, you work toward that, and you will gradually, through the practice and the building of this muscle, what is referred to by Ingo Swann as these conduits of consciousness. So what you're doing in coordinate remote viewing is you are consciously, in your conscious mind, which is what operates within the four-dimensional world in which we exist, you are perceiving up through 9 different conduits of consciousness, up into the unconscious mind. And when you first begin, or like when the guy sees the blue boxers, there are minor perturbations. That means it's just a spike of just a few seconds that spikes up into the unconscious through one of the conduits. But as a remote viewer, the process of training and working and training and working, it causes you to actually begin walking in both worlds all the time. So now it's not a minor perturbation up through a conduit of consciousness. It is a complete flow to and fro between the two minds, the unconscious mind and the conscious mind. Subconscious is below conscious. It's not the same. Subconscious, conscious, unconscious. The unconscious mind is the mind that we say is connected to the matrix field, which was a term being used before the movie, The Matrix. It refers to the collective unconscious, the global mind, that. It is from a physics perspective, it is a realm filled with waveform expressions of all things. Because you might be asking yourselves, what's he talking about here? How are we perceiving sounds and dimensionals and energetics. And it goes into quantum mechanical understandings. And it's not classical mechanical, it's quantum mechanical. And if you have to understand, if you understand classic physics and you understand quantum physics, then you understand that those of us that involve ourselves in this kind of work borrow from both in order to describe the workings of the quantum mind. And that's fair. If you understand that in physics, that every few years, another interpretation, a new understanding comes along. If you understand that the greatest physicists of our time right now will say to you that we can mathematically validate every theory, every interpretation that we have. But the truth is, it's all bullshit. It could be wrong. It could be a new interpretation 2 weeks from now or 2 years from now. And so when the physicists who earn their livings studying our world and our universe are willing to stand up and courageously say, we can mathematically prove every interpretation we come up with, but it could all be wrong because a new understanding gives us a new perspective, and suddenly what we were proving mathematically was really just bullshit. And that is important for you to grasp. So anytime, and I was trained in that, in physics, and I'm telling you that you must understand that quantum mechanical interpretations are that. They are not all right, despite the fact that many physicists like to take that position. And quantum mechanical interpretations are not all right, despite the fact that there are some, fewer than in the classical, who like to say that, that they're always right and they can prove it. Yeah, sure you can prove it. They've all said they can prove it. But we borrow interpretations from quantum mechanical principles and quantum mechanical interpretations in order to explain what's happening with quantum mind. And that's been going on now for about the last 30 years. One of the guys that was first kind of in doing it and with a degree of popularity was Deepak Chopra. And Deepak and I are friends, and, we first met at the Mikhail Gorbachev State of the World Forum. We were both presenting there, and I was out of the Army at the time, and I was enamored with the guy and what he was doing and what he was talking about, and thought that it had a lot of applications back to remote viewing. And one time we found ourselves, I don't even remember why or where it was, but we were both sitting on the same stage, and we were answering questions from people. And he just kind of liked the answers I was giving, I guess. And so he said, look, let's do do some classes together. So we did. And he came up with this thing, Awakening the Divine Potential Within. He was really good at coming up with titles. Anyway, we did that, and it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Because everybody that he taught were about meditating. And remote viewing is not about meditating. Remote viewing is about going to work. It's about understanding your potential and your capabilities as a human being, that they're natural, that they're there, and that if you follow these protocols, if you go through stage 1 and then you go through stage 2 and then you go through stage 3, which is trying to sketch dimensionals and textures and probing and labeling them, and you go into stage 4, which is a continuation of some stage 2s, some stage 3s, but it's now going into aesthetic impact, emotional impact, and other kinds of things. And then stage 5 is devolved of, you disengage from signal line contact per se. And now what you're doing is you're taking an intangible concept from stage 4 and pulling it forward and breaking it open into 4 different categories of data. And then stage 6 is sketching more elaborately. It used to be called the modeling stage, but they don't do that or teach that anymore. And then that's at the end of all that, then you go through a process that's very deliberate of objectifying, going through your session and re-objectifying what it is you perceived. In other words, you start off with, my perception of the target site was that it's this. Stage 2 data, principal elements of stage 2 data were, principal elements of stage 3 data were, principal elements of stage 4, stage 5, stage 6, and then you have a final summary paragraph. So by the time you're all done, a really good trained coordinator remote viewer will produce upwards of 60 pages of visual and verbal sensory data. Now, a lot of viewers don't do that, but that was the That was the end goal. That's what they were trying to do. And new viewers typically struggle with doing that because they're struggling with their modalities of perception, struggling with how they're going to see it. But eventually you get to that place, and then once you master it, then you get to the place where you can start to modify it a little bit to fit your needs. So guys like Mel Riley, who love coordinate remote viewing, I personally hate it, but he loves coordinate remote viewing, and so he just recently passed away as well. But you know, he went through the 6 stages of the structure perfectly, all the time, perfectly. And you know, his printing was like it was done by a typewriter. He was just amazing, and his sketches were amazing. And then other viewers were sloppier, and you know, but they got through it, but they were sloppier in how they did it. I mean, you learn everything about it, and once you are termed operational in the training program at the CIA, then you had an opportunity to go on and do one of the more advanced forms of the phenomena, which for me was extended remote viewing. Now, extended remote viewing is devoid of the protocol of coordinate remote viewing. That's the reason I like it. Extended remote viewing to me is like flying, because now what I get to do is I'm still going into an altered state of consciousness, only instead of alpha brainwave state for coordinate remote viewing, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you about that cool down for that, but you do that, you cool down before you go over and take the coordinates. And when you go into the room to take the coordinates, at the unit, it was a gray room. It had gray walls, gray ceiling, it had a gray table, you know, it had a gray carpet. You sat in a black chair. You worked with a black Ingo pen, which is a pilot pen, and plain white blank sheets of 8 by 10 paper. And there was a stack of it. You pulled one page over and set it in front of you. There was a target podium, it was called, to the front of the room, about 10 feet away from you. The monitor had a chair at the end of the table, and there was a video camera and a microphone, and the light on the video camera was blacked out. So you would have cooled down. You're in an alpha brainwave state, so you're kind of loopy, but you're still aware of what's going on. You can hear, you can sense, you can feel, you could adjust the room. There was a rheostat for the light. You could turn it down as far as you wanted to or up as bright as you wanted to. And then you would take the coordinates and do your work. And when you were operational, now you no longer needed a monitor, so you could go over and give yourself the coordinates. But you would not take a target folder over. So, because obviously what would the tendency be, right? A cheater would look at it. They would open it up and go, oh, that's it, okay? And then they go back and do it and turn in a marvelous session. Instead, once you were done with that, you didn't have to have a monitor anymore, and you could do something else. Extended remote viewing took you to a theta brainwave state. So you had a cool down process that would take you to a theta brainwave state. And then once you're in the theta brainwave state, again, you're given the coordinates. But we were taught sort of a semblance of nonlinear mind mapping. And nonlinear mind mapping is key because you don't want to try to do anything in a binary way in extended remote viewing or in a linear outline format. You want to understand that you're going to perceive at random through your unconscious mind tagged to the target. And what are these things that are there? It's because in this matrix field, as I explained to you, energy is everything and everything is energy. Therefore, everything can be expressed as waveform on some level. So the waveform expression of all things, all thoughts, all life, all forms, all materials, all everything, as in an atom, right? The waveform expression of those things, which is in quantum, we believe that they exist naturally and only become particle when observed or expected in some fashion, but otherwise decohere, collapse back down into waveform and exist in waveform. So all things exist in waveform on some level. And that is what you're perceiving. You are detecting and decoding a waveform. Why not just every waveform? Because you've been given a coordinate, which is tied to a concept of a target, which think of it as though it's a fiber optic cable bundle now. So now you have a a concept of a gestalt of a target, a gestalt being greater than the sum of its parts. So it's not, if it's the Eiffel Tower, it's not just, iron and asphalt and, cable. It's everything. It's in the mind of the designer, in the mind of the life forms around it, and all these different things all constitute the gestalt, above and beyond and around and under. All of these things, all of the emotionals and the aesthetics and the intangibles, and all of that constitutes part of that target gestalt. So you are detecting and decoding the waveform expression of that. Detecting how? Detecting through the 9 conduits of consciousness. As you are in an altered state of consciousness, you are asking for, what am I seeing here? What am I supposed to be seeing here? What's the most important thing for me to see here? In extended remote viewing, as you detect that, your biological brain is what detects it. Your biological brain then carries it back at the speed of thought, which is faster than the speed of light. And if you want to read about that, I'm not going to talk about it tonight. Read Russell Targ or Elizabeth Rauscher's paper on human thought being faster than the speed of light. Here again, from a quantum experiment or theoretical physicist perspective, they can prove it mathematically. So it is for now the truth that we have, that human beings can process faster than the speed of light. So it's a new cosmological constant, human thought. So you detect the waveform expression, you decode that expression into something that your biological brain has a reference for. If you're asked to look at things that you don't have a reference for or an experience Rolodex for, your brain struggles with accurately decoding, and so it will just use the next best example of something that it can find at the speed of light. At the speed of thought, and it throws it up, and it goes, it's this. And so you then objectify that, what your brain has said it is, you objectify that two-dimensionally on a piece of paper, or that's in coordinate remote viewing. In extended remote viewing, you have focus questions, which are indeterminate questions. They are not supposed to focus you on the target. It is supposed to be a question that focuses you on different aspects of things, like what's the principal element of the gestalt here, or what's the principal concept here, or in other words, what's a principal intangible that might be here. It's just a cue for you. So as you start to answer that question, as you begin to look at that focus question, you're doing it in a nonlinear format. You may start with, focus question number 1, and a whole bunch of stuff may come to you, and you start writing it around, in little tiny circles, and you circle it and circle it and circle it. And then you may jump down to focus question number 3 or 4 and start getting more data there, and up to 3 again, and then up to 2, and then back up to 1, back down to 4. It just, every viewer is different in how they are perceiving and how they are detecting and how they're decoding and how they begin the process of objectification. When you're done with an extended remote viewing session, say 60 minutes, any session, coordinate or extended, should never go more than 90 minutes. Past 90 minutes, you reach a point of what is called diminishing returns. You've exhausted yourself. You are really not better by sticking with it and going longer. So at 60 minutes, you end your session and you do your session summary. At 90 minutes maximum. If you can get it at 60 minutes, if you can get it in 30 minutes, if you in 30 minutes feel like you've exhausted what you're able to perceive in that session, you turn around and do that. You write let's say you had 4 focus questions, then you're going to have a 6-page summary, a 6-paragraph summary. Again, paragraph 1, my perception of the target site were this, the target gestalt are this. Then, for this focus question number number 1, I saw this. Now, focus question number 2, I saw these things. Focus number 3, number 4, etc. And then you have a final summary paragraph. And why do you have this final summary paragraph? Because it is theoretically understood that as you're in the process of the session, you don't always get everything objectified on the page before you stop. It means that there's still data being processed through the biological brain that's coming out of these conduits of consciousness, and then you are objectifying it and producing it on the page. So that's extended remote viewing. It's usually done laying down. When we teach it, you're laying down and you have blindfolds. According to remote viewing, we typically give you a blindfold again for cool down, but in according to remote viewing, you're moving through a structure, so you have to be able to look at the page. So that's why according to remote viewing is in an alpha brainwave state, and you do in all of the remote viewing processes, you do what is called porpoising. Porpoising means your brainwave state doesn't just stay steady at a center theta or center alpha brainwave state, depending on things that go on in the room. Somebody in the room goes like that. What happens? You're no longer in an alpha brainwave state. You jump up into very shallow beta, or very high alpha. So all these things can cause you to go up and then, I got to cool back down again and go back down and start re-engaging the structure. A door opens up, you back up again and back down again. Somebody shuffles their paper, back up again, back down again. Extended remote viewing, we do a lot of things to try to minimize that. We do the same thing in coordinate remote viewing, but you're more easily distracted in coordinate remote viewing. Still, in the room, we play pink noise in the room when we were doing live courses in the Zoom classes that we've been doing since the pandemic. Well, we don't do that. You're kind of on your own at home, so you just do your sessions and you have the cool down audio files that are given to you. Now, the cool downs are unique. They're very much like the hemisync stuff. They use binaural beat, and they use binaural beat followed by a yogic relaxation breath meditation, and they use pink noise to kind of embed into it there, just pink noise. There is no subliminal messaging at all. It's just guided imagery, guided meditation to take you to a place that we know. When we audio engineered these, we actually tested them on 10 students so that we could get a valid breakdown. And we know that on 10 students, if they follow what they're asked to do, that we know that 9 of those students will get to the intended brainwave state. And now whether they sustain that or not is up to them in their practice and how well they do and how much their intention is involved and all these different things. Now, thought incubation is something all of you can do, because if you understand what I said to begin with, which is that this is an inherent ability not unique to me or any other remote viewer. It's an inherent ability in every human being to see distant in space-time, to be able to see beyond the physical. It's there. We all have it. We're born into this life with it. And pediatricians, particularly in Switzerland, have studied and published on it pretty extensively about children being able to see perfectly, and why, if we were to nurture that and encourage it and to keep it open, that we would change our world. And I've been, guilty of saying the same thing, that, changing our world, of, altering the course of human destiny or the global societal evolution, which we are now in a destructive phase. Before we get back into a building phase, there a lot of things are going to have to change, a lot of things. But if you were to, it's a generational perspective I think is needed. We need to have adults who begin to believe this, but people who begin to build families need to, your child can still become a physician or a physicist, it doesn't matter, or an airline pilot, but they should and could and should always know that they have a connection to the not beyond the physical that they were born with. And they shouldn't be told that they're unusual or that it's stupid or pointless for them to explore that or to build upon it or to nurture it. And we'll talk more about that maybe in the next hour. But thought incubation, I'll say that, then Nate, I think you'll probably want to set the room again. Thought incubation is this. I've been teaching it for a number of years because I want people who don't have, even go through the skills of remote viewing and develop those can still use this. Every night you are going to go through all phases of brainwaves. You're going to go down, you're going to porpoise, and then you're going to come back up in the morning. So one of the things that you can do, and this is one of the things that I actually began teaching Reeves Callaway, who was the guy that designed Callaway Golf Club, and his son Reeves Callaway, who designs Callaway racing cars or Callaway Corvettes, and Buck Charlson and a number of other individuals throughout the years that were physicists or engineers who said to me, I want to learn what you're teaching because I know that my design, the thing that came to me in a dream, or it came to me in a hallucination. It came to me in a moment of where I was checked out of the physical, and then I saw this thing, and as I saw it, I sketched it down, and then my engineering capabilities clicked in, and I was able to figure out how to make it, and how to make it, and how to get my employees to make it. But the image for this, the idea for it, came to me in my mind's eye. It came to me in a dream, and I want you to explain that to me. So that's what I did. But by actually training him in coordinate remote viewing eventually, but we started off with just simple thought incubation exercises. So if you want to carry a specific question as pertains to your life, whatever that may be, am I on purpose? What's my calling? Whatever it might be. What's my primary question? Whatever you choose it to be. What should I be doing now? Just remember this and hear me well. It's garbage in, garbage out. So if you write some giant nebulous frickin' question that would take anybody a dissertation to actually address it, then expect that you're gonna get a big giant fat nebulous answer that's not going to really help you. So whatever question it is that you have for yourself, for your life, for your family, whatever it happens to be, look at it and ask yourself if that question can be broken down into other questions. Because if it can, then that's what you need to do. And then you need to choose the most significant of those other questions that you really, really want to address. And you may even be able to perceive that the answers will allow the questions to be asked in sequence. You'll know that when you look at that. But don't just write down a single question and call it good enough. Okay, look at that question and decide if that question is actually 5 or 6 questions rolled into one. If it is, break it apart. Pick the one that's most important, the start of the sequence, and that's you write it down, right? That is called objectifying, which means that through the act of doing that, you are locking that concept in to your unconscious mind. I want to explore this. Then, as you begin your process of going to sleep. Now, you know what? Those of you that are, chimed in with the gateway experience, go ahead, use that. If you're not going to do that, use any kind of a guided meditation, or use a yogic relaxation breath meditation, or just go to sleep. Just remember, make it your intention to remember what you perceive out there. And it will be very similar to dream recording, because it will be difficult at first if you've not done this. When you get up in the morning, the answer will be there, because you want to make it your intention to remember what you perceive. So when you get up, try to record what you perceived. Now, if you are anything like me, when I first started trying to do it and was taught to do it, as I would start a sentence, the end of the sentence would evaporate, before I even got to the midway point. I said, damn. So it's just practice and practice and practice and making it your intention. Everything's governed by intention anyway. But if you will do that, what will end up happening is you'll be able to use this extremely creative portion of your life, which is every night you're going to be doing this. And you'll be able to come up with answers. It may not be one answer for each night. You may have to explore that question for a week, maybe 2 weeks. But the answers will be there. Why? Because the answer to everything is already out there. It's already out there. And it's there in a waveform expression. Okay, so that's coordinate extended and thought incubation. Now, I'm just going to say one thing, and it'll be the, I think, perfect stopping point. When I was trained to do this, I began to transform. I stopped believing in things. I stopped believing that there was something beyond the physical. I stopped believing that there was something beyond the physical and maybe I could interact with it or communicate with it or benefit from it. And I began to know. I fought it because I was a skeptic, and I fought it really hard at first, and I could always find reasons for, in my own mind, to justify why I didn't do what they were telling me that I did. But after a while, you start to feel really stupid for doing that because you're just kind of arguing against what's really quite obvious and what you were able to do. And when you start to reconnect with this piece of yourself, which is beyond the physical, and you know that you always have access to it, and that indeed you have always had access to it, you just chose to stop listening or to stop looking, to stop hearing and smelling and feeling. And you can regain that again. And once you do, you don't have enough time left in your life to forget it again. So you're changed forever, which was the very thing that the program manager, Fern Gavin, said to my wife. He, unauthorized, was bringing all the spouses in after the people were read on and brought into the unit. And he was telling them, CIA didn't know he was doing this, nor did the DIA, but he was bringing them in and he was going, look, your husband is not going to be the same man you married. His life is never going to be the same again. And we know that we've had a lot of trouble with this in the past. So we're really hoping if we tell you up front that, yeah, you'll be okay with that. And you can help him through all of this and encourage him and support him, which that did not work for my wife at that time. You know, it was like she was really pissed off when I got home that night. Because it was like, what do you mean you're going to not be the same person? What do you mean you're going to change forever? What do you mean all that? So, yeah, it didn't really help. But the truth is, I did change forever. Everything that I thought that I was, everything I thought was important, everything I thought I wanted to be changed. I became different. I became awakened and aware. And that's why, after I got out of the unit, I went off to Commander General Staff College, and I wrote my Master Military on Science thesis and involved remote viewing in it, because I actually, my thesis was on non-lethal weapons, war without death, but I stuffed some remote viewing in there as a non-lethal, military capability. I did not, to my knowledge, put it in the book, Non-Lethal Weapons, War Without Death, and please, folks, don't go buy that, because that's like the most boring book on the planet, and it even puts me to sleep. And it's a textbook, so it's like $130. But it was recommended reading at the U.S. Army War College because everybody was just beginning to explore non-lethal technologies for military application. And that's what that book was really about. That's what it was designed to talk about. So, yeah, I knew I was going to write a book called, I didn't want to call it Psychic Warriors. It was called something else. I really hate that title, actually.
All here for a very particular reason, and one of them in particular is Data, the gentleman next to you, who's rated top 5 hackers in the world, and does some contract work in certain regards for the alphabet agencies, and he has access to many great things, which he sends to us, which we're able to use as reference points, which for anybody who's researched this subject matter as it pertains to the UFO knows that you have to sift through 80 to 90% of absolute bullshit, disinformation, counterintelligence, and even hoax stuff, just nonsense that's out there, to actually be able to get to the kernels of truth. And what he's been able to do is, through his access to all of these portals within the NSA, CIA, DOD, NASA, etc., pull up directly a lot of declassified files that 0.1% of the population would ever find. As you know, they declassify things, but they never broadcast it. It's not like posted anywhere. You have to seek it out and usually go through FOIA to get it. And one of the things...
And they're very selective about what they declassify and what they release
yes,
under FOIA.
Exactly.
Because they, nothing is ever said by any of those agencies. I mean, they are not in the information game, you know? So they're not in the information or truthfulness game. So anything that ends up with a FOIA request, they sit down at a meeting and they decide, okay, well, so, you know, we've got, we have 47,000 documents here. What are we going to release? Oh, well, let's release 7,800 of them, constituting 92,000 pages. And then we'll have a team go through and redact anything that we think is controversial. And so we'll just, release under FOIA those things that are acceptable for us to lose control of at this point. And then a lot of people run around going, waving the FOIA docs in their head, in the air going, I got it, and it's really what you got was what they were willing to give you and let you read about. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no, 100% true, which is the bane of existence for any ufologist or person who actively is seeking the truth, is knowing that, they're giving you a little bit of breadcrumbs, but it's never the mother lode that we all hope for. But as it pertains to something, and Joe Cat works with data within this as well, one of the things he brought forth during one of our Gateway Experience rooms that we did was this declassified document through the CIA, which was absolutely, incredible. And I really wanted to get your thoughts on that before we move forward, just because you happen to be discussing in detail the different forms of remote viewing. And it seems here that this particular document, which was called Mars Exploration, May 22, 1984, listed this, which is exactly what you said. And I'm curious, after I read this briefly, if you think this is legit, if you're aware of this, and if you've had experience with this particular thing. But it says method of site acquisition, sealed envelope coupled with geographic coordinates. The sealed envelope was given to the subject immediately prior to the interview. The envelope was not opened until after the interview. In the envelope was a 3x5 card with the following information: the planet Mars, time of interest approximately 1 million years BC. Selected geographic coordinates provided by the parties requesting the information were verbally given to the subject during the interviews: 727, 101, 604, and 908. And then it gives this full 10-page transcript from the monitor and the sub. And it goes through and discussing essentially these tall, 12-foot tall aliens, essentially the civilization that existed a million years ago on Mars, pyramid structures, this essentially a doom that was about to befall the planet, and it goes through essentially this whole process in which you were speaking about, as far as what the protocol was. And incredibly fascinating. I can shoot it to you in a DM if it's something, or offline if you want to copy it. And anybody for that matter, feel free, as always, hit us in the DMs, and we'll make sure that we send these things to you for your own information.
Yeah. What's the heading on it say? What's the heading up on the document?
It says approved for
and what's the year?
1984.
Well, yeah, it probably says CIA declass or something like that. Approved for
CIA RDP 96, and then a bunch of numbers. Mars exploration, May 22, 1984.
But what's the heading on it? I mean, is it like DOD or is it CIA?
It's CIA, and it's not unofficial stationery, which is what I guess was the curiosity that we had.
Well, here's what I think it is, based on what you're telling me, is the CIA declassified all those documents, and so there's 92,000 of them out there. If you go to CIA.gov and if you use their search engine and look for released or FOIA releases on SRI, ERV, CRV, or whatever, something along that lines, if you'll search that, you'll find the trove that's there. And it's even sly how they do it. You have to download them all like one at a time. It's 12,780 documents, I think, something like that, or 92,000 separate pages. So what I'm pretty sure you're describing is probably, sorry, had to sneeze. You're describing probably something that came out of SRI and not something that was done at the unit, because the unit did in fact do off-planet work, and I'll describe the protocol to you all about that. But it sounds to me, based on a 3x5 card, that was the way SRI was doing stuff. So they had an envelope, and they had the information, or what was called by Inga Swan feedback, and this was one of the things that Ingo Swann really was adamant about, is that to complete the training loop or the evaluation loop for any remote viewer, you had to provide them with feedback. You had to say, okay, this is what you thought you saw, this is what you saw. And from here, this is, what can you take from here? Can we figure out what you did wrong if you didn't have a good session? Or can we figure out what you did right if you had a good session? Or if you had a mediocre, can we figure out what out of the information you produced was actually part of the target gestalt? That was why that stuff was done. Now, the SRI would take that 3x5 card, they'd put it in a sealed envelope, and that envelope would have the coordinates written on the outside of it, or it would just be a blank envelope. And then were using a computer to randomly generate a coordinate. And it actually did start in the early days as being like a grid Mercator or a lat long. And then it was determined that because they were using, grid Mercator or lat long, the other coordinate process you could use would be Cartesian, right? But that wouldn't really apply in this case. But I can tell you when it does apply, and I'll give you that example in a moment. But what they were doing was putting lat long down. And what they found is that the viewers were, because they knew that the targets they were sending them to look at for the most part were in the area of Stanford, Palo Alto, and so they were starting to memorize the latitude and longitudes that they would be giving them. So whenever somebody would give them a lat long, which was supposed to be independent of the target, actually it wasn't independent. It was a geographical location on the surface of the planet of that target. And, these were not stupid people. So they started to connect the dots, and then their sessions were being driven by analytical overlay or the process of their own imagination, because they were going, okay, what's in this area? Oh yeah, that's this. And then they would start describing something that they thought would be in that lat long that they, memorized. So they had to stop doing that. So they gave up grid Mercator, they gave up lat long, and they gave up Cartesian. And that's when they started doing, in the way latter stages, that were just two sets of 4 numbers that were randomly assigned based on the concept of the target. But see, that came from the remote viewing unit, not from SRI. So when you're telling me they're geographical locations or geographical coordinates, then that's old SRI stuff, and it's really old SRI stuff. And that kind of limited feedback would have been just the thing that would have, pissed Ingo Swann off. Just to have a 3x5 card with some stuff written down there, because Ingo Swann would have preferred that there was some sort of even an artist concept of Mars, or that there was an artist concept of the spot on Mars, whether it was the Twin Peaks, whether it was the volcano section, whether it was a crater, anything. He would have wanted something like that. They didn't have, I don't think, they didn't have a rover on the planet then, so I don't think they had any photos of it other than what they had circling around it. But he would have wanted that kind of stuff, photographs, telescopic images, and an article or something else that could be there. So the viewer could go through that and say, wow, okay, I didn't see that, but I saw this, I perceived this, I perceived this, I perceived that. So did SRI do that as an experiment? Yeah, but the cool thing was what happened in the remote viewing unit.
Well, really?
It was in the remote viewing unit. Remember, everybody, they track your accuracy levels. Now, how do they do that? Any given Gestalt target would have 100 quantifiable, measurable attributes pertaining to that. That would be developed by the individual, the program manager, assigning those coordinates. So again, just using the Eiffel Tower as an example, he would just go through and go, okay, in the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, 4, 5, and 6, these are quantifiable known attributes that I can perceive about this target. That I know about this target based on analysis, and they would put that down there. And then what would happen is the viewer would do their session, they would come back, and the program manager would go through and evaluate, and he would look for, okay, did they have something tall. Oh, let's see, is tall in here? Oh, yeah, there's tall. Is there something airy in here? Oh, yeah, there's airy here. Is there steel here? No, iron. Oh, there's iron. And they would go through and look at all of it and measure what you did against what they thought you should have done. And then they would give you a statistical evaluation. Pretty hard, easy to do. If you get 72 out of 100, you're a 72%er. If you get, there were certain values that they might assign if you had been not perceived it actual or not objectified it on the page, but you objectified it in your summary, you would still get points for it, even though you didn't sketch it or probe it or label it or describe it in the signal line contact on the page. If it was part of your summary, you would get a credit for it there. So that was done. It wasn't done a lot for operational targets, because on operational targets, they very seldom had any, good information on it, unless they were part of, the team sitting there and making up those targets. But usually they got a tasking from NSA or tasking from a DIA or tasking from the CIA, and they would just turn around and it would be, in that case, a triple blind. Usually the program manager would just look at the tasking, and he really wouldn't know what they were looking for. It would be a very generic tasking. So he'd do his best to assign a concept to that target, but he didn't really know what it was. And then if there was a monitor, that monitor didn't know what it was, so that's a double blind. And then the viewer wouldn't know what it was, so that's a triple blind. But, sometimes that stuff was being done and sent back for real purposes. Sometimes it was being done and sent back for trick stuff. And some of it was stupid, and sometimes you had a customer that didn't believe in the intelligence product, and so they would do stupid things to try to prove why they shouldn't have to believe in the intelligence product. And usually that embarrassed them, because the viewers always kind of came through and were always able to see through something like that. I'll give you examples of that in a minute. But let's just go back to the off-planet stuff. So now if they're tracking
David,
viewers...
really quick, just because as we get to the plan, I just want to say with the recent room reset, because there's a number of people who have their hand raises. Once again, we're holding off questions. There are some people who are on stage, but we're holding off all audience questions until a time that we feel it's worth opening up, because everything that right now Dr. Morehouse is saying is very important. We want to make sure that all the information gets out there, and once we feel that the information that we wanted to discuss with him is presented thoroughly enough, then we can open up and bring people on stage. I didn't turn hand raising off just because I'm going to keep it on for the sake of order of people who've had their hand raised the longest. I'll be bringing you up towards the end, but just want to remind people that is what's going on, in case you're getting frustrated as to why you're not being brought up. Today is more of a podcast in the sense that we are here specifically to speak with Dr. Morehouse and hear all of his experience as it pertains to the subject matters that we discuss quite frequently in this club. So just want to thank you all for your patience, and just make sure that was reiterated again with this reset. And thank you, David. Back to the off-world.
You bet. Thanks, Nate. So in calibrating viewers, you had to know, you could tell when viewers were, everything moves in a cycle, even remote viewing. So you're able to tell when the viewer is on the downswing, when they hit the trough, when they start up, and as they start up, they would track it when you went over the peak and came back down again. And they would, some viewers would do it once a week, some viewers would do it twice a week, some viewers would cycle, once every 3 weeks, some viewers could cycle once every month and a half. I mean, it was just independent to each viewer. That's one of the truths of remote viewing. There are other rules that are applied. It's not 100% accurate, never has been, never will be. Oh, there are some remote examples of it being 100% accurate, but the general rule applies. It's not 100% accurate, so you don't ever make that claim. You never trust the results of a single remote viewer operating independently of other remote viewers. Now, does that mean you can't do your own thought incubation or do your own kinds of targets? No. What it means is that if you're just doing it by yourself and doing it solo, then expect that it could be spot on or it could be completely off, because you don't know unless you're tracking where you are, and other things. And, if you're front loading yourself on the target, that doesn't really count, as a remote viewing exercise, because you're front loaded. So there are all kinds of things. So all what we say is all of us are always better than one of us. So anything that's going to be viewed for a real purpose needs to have a team of viewers looking at it. So you get a spread, you get a spectrum of data that comes from these viewers. Not just put all your eggs in one basket with one viewer. And then the third rule of remote viewing is that it is not a standalone endeavor. So anything that remote viewers ever did, they were just part of the intelligence collection methodology, structure. There's SIGINT, ELINT, SCIENT, there's FODINT, there's HUMINT, there's like 32 different INTs. There are 5 principles, but there are like 32 other intelligence collection methodologies. And remote viewing just happened to be one of those. So in what you need to know is none of those intelligence collection methodologies are 100% accurate. None of them. They all fluctuate, and they all have bullshit applied, and they all have human interpretation of them. Even photo imagery analysis has, it gets interpreted by people. And so we miss things. Photo imagery analysis was one of the things that brought us into the war in Iraq in 2003, along with, trumped up human intelligence, which was interpreted and passed off as accurate. And it just, all these things that were part of the intelligence collection puzzle, they were wrong. And, Colin Powell ended his career, as a statesman by going to the United Nations and throwing up pictures and then, regurgitating human intelligence reports and standing there and claiming that weapons of mass destruction were present and we need you to support us in occupying this country. And it was all bullshit. It was all bullshit. So was it all faked and fabricated to support that very purpose? Well, some would say yes, and then others would just say, no, we were just completely screwed up and read the tea leaves the wrong way. My point to you is that remote viewing was as valuable as any other intelligence collection methodology. And you, as people listening, got to get that. You need to understand that used in the context in which it was being expected to perform, it was as valuable as human intelligence, as signal intelligence, as photo intelligence, as cyber intelligence, as any of it. It was valuable. It produced information. And if you went back to Stansfield Turner, after Helms as a CIA director, when being asked about this, well, do you think this is worth the effort? He said, hell, if it gives me 6% accurate information about something that I cannot glean through any other intelligence collection methodology, it's intelligence dollars well spent. Well, just 6%. Actually, it's way beyond that, way beyond that. And if you want to really look at what it was, then read Jessica Utz, UTTS, PhD researcher paid by the CIA to evaluate, an assessment of remote viewing. And she did it. And this, of course, was in 1995 when my book, Psychic Warrior, was getting ready to come out, because the CIA was like, well, shit, we weren't able to stop the book, and we weren't able to stop the messenger, me. And so now, we better figure out what we're going to do, because as soon as this book hits the shelves, there are going to be a hell of a lot of questions asked about what we've been doing with, psychic research and psychic warfare and blah, blah, blah. Can you imagine why they were concerned, right? So it was like, we got to come up with a backstory here. We got to figure this out. We got to do this. And that's when the first series of FOIA documents were released. And they contracted Dr. Utz and said, hey, give us a shitty review on this. And she came back and said, well, I really can't do what you're asking me to do. They're actually pretty accurate on this. And they gave her the shittiest stuff they could find, right? They didn't give her like the star work. They gave her the crappy work because they wanted her to say that it was invaluable as an intelligence collection methodology. And so they said, that's not what we want you to say. And she said, well, that's what I'm saying. This is my report. And they said, well, you're not hearing us. That's not what we want you to say. But this is my report. So they walked right over the top of her and found somebody else who was perfectly willing to look at it with a cocked eye and come up with a completely different evaluation. I can't remember who that was, but that person is out there, and people in the remote viewing community have attacked him routinely ever since for having done that. But so all these things are truth. So now we're back to what are we doing for off-planet stuff? Well, if they know that they're going to do something at an off-planet target, they want to pick a series of viewers that they know are in the upswing. Because why? Because they're not going to have feedback. They don't have quality feedback. They don't really know what's inside a lava tube, you know, an Olympus Mons. They don't know that's there. We haven't put anything in there. Although they have been talking about, even back then, talking about, you know, a manned mission to Mars for decades now. And what they know is that if they're going to put a manned mission to Mars on that planet, that they're going to have to protect them when they get there. And this idea of having some surface habitat, like in the movie The Martian, that's not going to happen. They're going to, first of all, they can't build it strong enough to withstand most of the surface winds, most of the wind and dust storms, most of the, you know, the stuff falling out of the sky and still impacting with the planet. And so they're not going to build something like that. They're going to put the first manned mission to Mars inside a lava tube. Well, that's why they're rehearsing this and studying lava tubes in Scandinavia, and there's several places in the United States where they're doing this, because these lava tubes are just like these rigid straws, you know, that in the case of Olympus Mons go on for hundreds of miles. And this is also where they believe water will be. So they want to put these first habitats inside these lava tubes because there's water there, which will, number one, allow them to raise crops. Number two, provide them a source of drinking water once filtered. And number three, with a pretty minimal operation, they can synthesize fuel out of it, hydrogen, rocket fuel, to get themselves back. So it's all a really, really big, huge thing for them to do this kind of stuff. But back then, they wanted to know, you know, what was in this place, what's below the surface. And they know also that there are huge pockets in these lava tubes, which some of them are the size of, quite literally, Manhattan, you know. Now, I didn't know that stuff back then, but I know it now. But back then, we were being tasked to look at things that, you know, we began to understand was Mars, because you can only see the first time was, for me, was I was in the Twin Peaks area. I drew the Twin Peaks. And then I drew this little rectangle thing with little wheels on it and stuff. And, of course, my feedback was it was one of the rovers. And it was like, yeah, spot on kind of thing. But then when they've done some sort of thing in terms of calibration, like they know that you're on Mars, they know that you're seeing the terrain, then what they will do in, you know, subsequent targets is they would put you in what they're really looking for, like subsurface, and what do you see and what do you feel, and, you know, other things pertaining to breaking that target mission apart. Now, this is what I can tell you, and I can't prove it, but what I can tell you is that often we would see what looked like civilization, you know, abandoned structures in some of these giant caverns. Now, we didn't know what we were looking at the time that we were looking at it, and we've learned so much more in the decades that have followed the stuff we were doing there, but we know that that was the kind of information we were producing. So we could have been wrong. It could be, you know, it could have been a completely dead civilization. It could be a civilization that hid from us, or it could be a civilization that had ample life forms, however that presents itself, and we just didn't see it. But I know that looking into tubes, into caverns, and subsurface work that we were doing in the unit, that we were producing that kind of information, and I don't know where that information was going. I don't know who the customer was. I don't know if NASA was asking for that, or I don't know, to be honest with you, if it was just something that the program manager decided he wanted to do, or if the guy that was over the program manager at the CIA DIA decided that they wanted to do it. So I don't know. They didn't ever come back to us and say who the customer was. We just did the work. Now, in the doing of that, there was work done beyond Mars, off planet. And let me explain to you this. Now, we know that because we have been studying now the separation of planets and separations of solar systems, that we know that the universe is expanding outward. And so some years ago, about 20 years ago, cosmologists started going, well, if we can calculate, how fast these bodies are separating, then we can reverse engineer this back to a point of singularity where the universe began, which is referred to as the Big Bang, which was not a Big Bang. It's not like some big explosion. That's a complete misconception. That's not what happened. It, from this point of singularity, just came from something. And so if it came from something and just presented itself, like it popped through and then began expanding outward, it means that our universe is finite. It's not infinite. It's finite. And there have been mathematical models calculated that actually show, various shapes that they believe that it could, be in. Now, I, like all of you, used to lay on my back as a child and look up and think and just ponder the nature of infinite, right, and what that meant. And, holy shit, that's how do I wrap my head around that? And now I find out it's not infinite, it's finite. But here's the question I ask. Okay, then what's it in? If it's finite, what's it in? What's it what's the universe in? Could we ever find the edge? And what's that in? Whatever the universe is in, are there other universes in the same thing? The theory is yes. And if that's true, then what is that? What are all these universes in? What are they contained in? And what's that contained in? And and so it just keeps on going. And you start to now wrap your head around this new definition of eternal, right, of infinite for you, and understanding that it's impossible mathematically to draw a conclusion that, given the number of sheer possibilities that are out there, to think that we're the only thing in this universe, even in this galaxy, right, that exists. Or it's foolish to think that we're the only thing in this solar system with at least one planet with the ability to sustain life on some level with hydrogen and oxygen, albeit different than this environment, and also with water, that to think that it never sustained life. And to understand then that we have the total existence of humanity so far on this planet is... It's a scratch in time. It's all it is. We haven't lived here long enough yet to even destroy ourselves, which we're fast in the process of doing. But, it's not difficult if you look at the direction humanity is going to understand that on another planet, even in our solar system, another society could have existed and destroyed itself and just destroyed it and lost all. And now all we see are the dusted, crumbling hulks of their structures in these massive caverns, which we saw as remote viewers, but certainly we've never put a vehicle or people in there to look at it so far. But we will soon, probably in the next 10 years or so. So that's going to be, we're going to either be validated or, proven that we were just, imagining something that was there. It was analytical overlay. But let's go back to this idea that the universe is finite. So if you take that universe as a finite concept, now you can apply a Cartesian coordinate process to it. And by Cartesian, you could say, let's go x1 to 100, all right? And think of it as like panes of glass, x1 through 100. And we just sliced that down through this finite universe shape. And then we go a y, 1 through 100, and that goes through the y, right, the y axis, and a z, 1 through 100. and go through that axis. Now what you've done is you've divided up the known universe into conceptual squares. So you could go x 1 or x99, y52, z67. Well, that gives you a rectangle or a square of that universe theoretically, right? Well, you could take that concept and you can assign coordinates to it, and they did. And then what they would do is what we referred to comically as a shotgun blast. So you have 8 remote viewers doing this particular target, and it was a shotgun blast into that particular zone of the universe to determine what would they stumble into, basically is what they were trying to do. So if 8 people look and 6 people come back with correlating data, right, then that becomes a new target, a historical target, they call it. And that historical target would be put there with that concept and that target coordinate and, what each of the viewers produced there. Well, through the years, they just kept doing that and doing it. And frequently, they would go back and pull up, the same old target, and they would do that thing and see what viewers came up with. New stuff, old stuff, same stuff. And they just built these files, these long, lengthy files. Now, you're never going to see the CIA declass that and put it out, but
David,
that was what was
David,
done.
can you give us
Yeah.
any examples of any of those historical ones like that were, I don't know what you can and can't talk about, but anyone that, or one or two that is just incredible that you feel.
Yeah, I'll talk about anything. You ask me the question, I will tell you. I am not in the game of lying or being deceptive or trying to be secretive at all.
Perfect.
Anymore. I stopped doing that.
So then top three historical.
I took my heat round for that. I have seen a number of different things that were, to me, fascinating. And when I started teaching remote viewing in '96, in the really advanced classes, I started doing this on my own and sending students after some of these historical targets. Now, you might be thinking, well, how did you know what the historical targets are? Because I frickin' copied them and took them home. That's why. So as did vast majority of us. And why did a lot of us do that? Some of them may not have done it, but I can tell you that Mel, Ed, me, Lynn, Gabrielle did. And I'll tell you why. Because there were times where we knew people were shredding stuff. Like whenever a new commander would come into to the DIA, in answering to the CIA, that 2-star would say, I want an audit. I want an IG inspector to go to that unit, and I want them to review what they're doing, and I want them to tell me whether or not it's a unit I should keep. It just always happened. So it happened 3 times in the 3 years that I was there. So an inspector general would, they're supposed to be unannounced, but they're never unannounced. So an inspector general call would come down, and suddenly, how do I know that the next one was happening? Because every morning when I would come in to work, there would be like 8 or 10 burn bags filled with shredded documents, waiting on the floor to be picked up by the burn guys to take them over and burn them. And it was always like, well, what the hell are they doing? And so all the viewers would get together and go, what's going on here? And it was always, well, they're purging the files again. So, well, what are they purging? Well, we don't know. You have to go through the files, but if they see you going through the files, they're going to know you're trying to look and figure out what they're doing, and that's not good. So I just made this decision that, well, I'm gonna make a copy of everything I do. I'm going to make a copy of it for me, of everything that I do, because I want to be able to prove that I did it at some point in time if I ever need to do that. So I did. And so in the historical files, I was, pulling a lot of that stuff together, and I used to run my students against it. And it was always amazing to me because they would come up with this fantastic, amazing stuff that described things that we really didn't understand what it was. So I'll give you an example. The title of this will sound stupid to you, But everybody in the remote viewing unit started calling this the psychic hot tub. It was stupid because it was a sensation that you got viewing it, because what you were doing is where your perception would open, and what you would perceive that you were viewing was it felt as though you were like skydiving, is the best physical way I can give you. You felt like you were standing, and supporting and balancing in like a flow. And the flow was a flow of energy. It was a flow of waveform. And in the waveform, you were able to see and perceive. It came by you like images, like TV screens is how people used to describe it. Like you get a TV screen of something happening, and another TV screen, and another TV screen. And so you got this flow. But as you were asked to, as you looked off into the distance, you could see this moving, and it was like a web. It was like an intricate it wasn't a dimensional, meaning like it wasn't a designed web like a spider web. It was a web. It was more like neurons. It was more like capillaries and vessels, right? Moving in all these different directions. And there were flows going and coming, and we were standing in a flow that was coming to us. Now, people, again, just described it based on the sensation and the fact that the feeling was that this was a balancing mechanism within the universe, that the universe was balancing positive or negative, or present and past, or future, or back and forth. But there was a balancing mechanism going on. Now, that was what people used to describe for 20 years. And then all of a sudden, about 15 years ago, you saw these first images of that science was producing. It was on the cover of Scientific American. You had this exact same thing that I was describing. Of you've got this intricate vasculature of energies that are present within the known physical universe, whether it's dark energy or it's or something, or dark matter or something else. There's a circulatory system there. There's a balancing apparatus within the universe that doesn't allow one thing to pile up in one place, but that it is a living, breathing organism that is constantly moving and fluxing and balancing itself. And I'm paraphrasing considerably for you what cosmologists have written about it, but that is essentially what is being described and what is being depicted. So I was amazed, because when I saw that on the cover of Scientific American, which is high school science, but still it was fascinating, because it was like, wow, it's validation, So that became part of the feedback to students in the years that followed. So that was one thing, to come to that understanding about just the nature of our universe. The others, there were a number of places where we dealt with certain kinds we ran into entities in the remote viewing unit, and I carried that again forward into my students and chose the best ones for them to go after. There was one that was it was perceived as a spacecraft, and the beings that were in it or commanding it, controlling it, would, if you were just using a human description, you would want to describe them as Vikings. But they were quite golden, and their garb was golden, but it looked to us like armor. But they were very musculature and very tall, and were bearded, and were very focused. In all of these cases, the reviewers that were doing it came back and said they are aware of our presence, but will acknowledge nothing. So no one was ever able to interact with them. There was a giant golden wall that they stood in front of that had imagery on it that was shapes and symbols and things that we never attempted or were successful in interpreting, let's put it that way. But that these individuals that were controlling this craft were standing in front of the wall, and that they were constantly busy touching various aspects of the wall. And each time they would touch a various aspect of the wall, it would either go in or come out, or it would turn, or something else that it would do. And this was crap that was being done in the 80s that, continued into the 90s and into up until 2004. So, yeah, that was another one. A third was something that just looked, I don't know, it was a civilization. It was filled with entities that everybody always described them as humanoid, but I think that is a process of analytical overlay, because I think that, remember I told you that a viewer perceiving something in 8-dimensional waveform, 8-dimensional hyperspace, right? To perceive it and then to decode it into terms of 4-dimensional lexicon, your 4-dimensional biological brain's lexicon. If you don't have a reference for something, your brain at the speed of thought processes it as it is perceived. So as it's comfortable. So it gives you its next best thing. So I can't say that everything that we saw, in all honesty, was as how we saw it, but it was how we interpreted it. So in this particular civilization, it was humanoid, and it existed in a really gray world, in a gray structures that were quite enormous structures, almost cathedral-like, but they were very rectangular in it. There weren't anything. There was no roundness in any of it. So there were like things that people were standing on and walking from to one place to the other, but nothing was rounded in it. It was all cubic. It was all rectangular, rectangles upon rectangles upon rectangles. But they were massive, because there were images drawn by viewers of to scale. So it would be like standing next to, I don't know. It looked in some cases like maybe like standing next to the Empire State Building or the World Trade Center when they existed. That kind of scale in terms of these structures and the beings in and around those structures. But that was pretty much, that was about all that came out of that one, other than people just trying to define why everything was so gray. I mean, why the people were grayish, why the garb was gray. It was loose fitting, but it was gray. Why the structures were gray, like any perceptions of anything outside the structures were gray. It's just a weird, interesting thing that viewers were always producing for decades, doing that particular target. And more. There are lots more, but those three come to mind tonight.
That's incredible. I would love just to hear these stories all night long and just have you keep sharing these particular encounters, because they're incredibly fascinating. And one of the first things that came to my mind when you talked about the ship and the Viking-looking beings was the Octurians. If you're familiar at all, I don't know how much you
not at all
delve into that. Yeah,
I'm not
we can.
I'm afraid if I read about all that kind of stuff, that if I was doing it in a class, I would be front loading people.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
no, for sure. And it's not a subject that we'll dive into here anyway, as most of these rooms, if we go off usually everything is grounded in facts and things that are, at the very least fairly irrefutable and backed by, substantial evidence. But occasionally we'll have
Can I talk about two other things? Or
Oh,
are
no,
you
no,
ready?
no, no.
You want me to
No,
go
no.
again?
I was. We're nearing the top of the hour, so I tell you what. I'll just do a brief reset without any of the recap for those people who've joined the room, and then yes, please share more of them. Want to hear them. Welcome everybody. This is Nate Night Talks. We're with Dr. David Morehouse tonight, and the subject of the room is remote viewing UFOs and consciousness. He is the foremost authority around the world within the subject, and I guess you'd say skill set of remote viewing, something that we're all capable of doing. It is merely a skill set that needs to be honed and tuned and practiced. And he is sharing his experiences, his history within the Army Rangers, the CIA, the DIA, Project Stargate, Gateway Experience, et cetera, et cetera. And he was recently just sharing his top three. You said that they're called historical. What was the term for them?
Historical
off-planet targets, basically corroborated experiences or locations that remote viewers have all gone to and shared a very similar independent experience that was corroborated and incredibly fascinating. But we're continuing on this. I think with the angle kind of going forward, I think we're already on the path of how all of this is pertained to the UFO phenomena itself, your experience with EBEs, extraterrestrial entities, multidimensional beings, etc., and continue down that path, because I know a lot of people in the audience are very interested, given the disclosure of the past 3 years and the snowball effect that's happening right now in the media and the 180 days and everything therein. And so your insight and experience with that as it pertains to remote viewing and anything else you may have would be greatly appreciated, and I know would be very fascinating for everybody involved. So once again, everybody, we're holding off questions right now, doing it more as a podcast. Towards the end of the room, we will bring some more people up and allow for questions. Once again, will not be stories, asking a question under a minute, something very pointed that he can answer easily. And we'll make sure we get to everybody, but we do want to hear everything he has to say, because his experience and expertise in this subject is vast. So that being said, please, David, take it forward with those other two stories.
Okay, thank you. I get asked this question often. You know, people talk about Area 51 here in Nevada, and, you know, talk about the fact that people who say that they've tried to remote view it or do other things, you know, can't see anything there. And look, I've just told you that I know that there are other worlds, there are other civilizations. I know that just as a scientist, that I'll speak bluntly, I think you're an idiot if you actually think that, you know, that just because you have no physical evidence of something staring you in the face, that you could actually think that humanity is the only intelligent life form present in the physical known universe, or in the universe next to it, or the universe next to it, right? Because we've said that if we have a finite universe, what's it in? And, you know, how many other universes are in that same bubble, shall we say? So I think it's just stupid to turn around and say that you believe that there's nothing but us. It defies all logic. It defies all science. It defies all mathematics. It defies it defies chance for that to happen. So they're out there, and as remote viewers, we saw them. Of course, we don't have feedback. All we have is corroborative data, as Nate was pointing out. You know, over 30, 40 years worth of that kind of corroborating data. So that's what we produce. But so let's go back to the Area 51 thing. One of my dearest friends is Colonel Doug Hodge. Doug and I have known each other since Bosnia. He's a great guy, and he is a PA. He actually won the Paragon Award as the #1 PA in the U.S. Air Force, and then got promoted to brigadier general, and then resigned before he pinned on. And we worked at the National Center of Medical Readiness together. We've just done a lot of research together, been a lot of places together, doing, you know, working in medicine, medical devices, and medical device research. I was the tester of record for the Defense Medical Material Program Office when he was there, and we just did some really important work together. But so we spent a lot of time together, and he knows that I'm a remote viewer, and he knows what I've done, and he knows what I did with it, and that kind of stuff. So we would talk frequently, and I would say to him on a number of occasions, I'd go, so tell me about Area 51, because he worked there. He was a PA at Area 51, and he lived here in Las Vegas. And, you know, he said, look, the whole, you know, blacked out plane thing is real. He goes, I used to go every day, park at this place, get on the plane, sit in the same seat, fly, you know, can't see out the windows when you'd land. You know, everybody walked down the stairway to get to their different assigned vans. And when you get in the vans, we would put foggles on. Foggles are just like sun, wind, and dust goggles that are blacked out so you can't see. Or they are, you know, like protective glasses that are indeed, the surface of the glass is fogged. It's texturized so you can't see. Now, think about that for a minute. So all these people who actually work in the different research areas, they're wearing foggles. But who's not wearing foggles? The person driving them. right? So now you've got some just low-level contract driver, or maybe, some airman or somebody, but that person is looking at everything as they're driving around. But now when Doug gets to work, he's a PA. So if somebody over in some other area has a heart attack, or they fall and break their leg, or anything else, which every day there would be some emergency event somewhere in Area 51, he would have to get in the ambulance, he and the ambulance drivers, and they didn't put foggles on. They drove where they had to go. And so he looked at every building complex, every building, everything that was there. And he, of course, we can safely say he didn't see everything, and he didn't go into every room, and he was not in every laboratory, but everywhere that he was, he claimed, I never saw any kind of alien technology, and I never saw any aliens. And he goes, and you know that I would tell you if I did. And yeah, he would. So that was what he found out about Area 51. And I think it's important to note that. It doesn't mean that any of the things that we think might be there aren't there. It just means that I'm telling you firsthand of a guy who went to every area there and, was in every building, even though he didn't see every room or lab in those buildings. So he just never saw that there. And remote viewers never looked at that at the remote viewing unit. Why? Well, because that was a known classified target. I mean, they're really dead ass serious that you're not supposed to be looking in there. Like when pilots fly, my brother's an aerospace engineer for NASA. And when they're like in the days when they were testing and building the Global Hawk, he used to be in the backseat of a fast mover flying there. And as they would get somewhere near 51, the rules were you don't look in the box. It's called the box. You don't look in the box. And so there's always the 2-man or 3-man rule there, which is if you see the other guy looking in the box, you have to report him because they're not supposed to look in the box. And they don't want you to look down and see what's there. Every once in a while, there's a pilot, he would tell me. There'll be some fast mover pilot, F-16 pilot back in the day, would fake engine trouble because he wanted to land in the box. He wasn't supposed to look in the box, but he would declare an in-flight emergency and land in the box and then, stand there gawking around trying to see what he could see, both on approach, in the pattern and on approach, and then taxiing wherever they told him to taxi to. This is funny. You should know this because what they would do is pilots that did that, and there's about 1 or 2 a year that do that back then, maybe still. But when that plane lands, they actually won't allow it to take off again. So, and they basically arrest the pilot, whatever the rank is. They don't care. They arrest him, and they pull him in, and they interrogate him about what they did, what they saw, where they went, that kind of thing. And then they send somebody else who does know how to fly the aircraft out to start the aircraft. And if there is no, in fact, in-flight emergency thing there, they will not release the aircraft back to the unit. What they will do is they will take the wings off the aircraft, and they put the aircraft on a flatbed truck, and they make the unit pay for them to have that flatbed truck drive the F-16 back to wherever the F-16 came from, with the pilot in tow with a letter of reprimand from the commander of the Area 51. I just thought that was important to note that that's what happens. And that was kind of a funny response on that. Now, when I was up at the National Center for Medical Readiness, we were right outside the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. So with my friend Doug again, I saw the classified Air Force Museum. And so in the classified Air Force Museum, there is stuff there that I guarantee you will just make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. I saw a flying saucer there. It's in the classified museum. It was not a big round thing with a fan underneath it or 3 fans underneath it. It had nothing underneath it. It had no cockpit for the pilot that was visible. It had a bulb that was there. It looked like a discus with a small bulge in the middle of it. but it was riveted aircraft aluminum, which kind of threw me off because it was not some alien technology, or it could have been alien technology that was, constructed to, using our aircraft manufacturing capabilities. I don't know, but it was from the 60s. It was not a prop. I mean, somebody didn't stick it up on something for a joke. It was big. It was like 26 feet across. It was it was an amazingly strange thing to see. And I said to Doug, I go, well, what makes it fly? He goes, I don't know, maybe nothing. I go, I said, what do you mean? So you think they like slingshot it out somewhere? Throw it like a discus, like maybe a, clay pigeon thrower thing? I mean, come on. This thing had to fly somewhere. It had to do something, right? So it was there, 26 feet, across in diameter, and probably 6 feet thick, tapering down to edges that were about 4 inches. And it was, the flush rivet, aircraft aluminum, that whole thing. But there it sat in the classified museum right next to all these other things. I mean, most of you will not even realize that we had unmanned aerial drones taking pictures over the Soviet Union in the 50s. Can you imagine that? I didn't know that. I mean, really, I didn't. But I saw a flying saucer. That's the only one I've ever seen in that respect. Now, have I, in my years, like when we were doing stuff in Peru, seen unexplained phenomenon and seen, what looked to be like craft that were moving around? Because it certainly wasn't stars, and it certainly wasn't commercial aircraft. Commercial aircraft just couldn't do what these were doing. But, yep, I saw them in the Peruvian sky, along with, like 40 of my remote viewing students when we were there in Peru. What's another example of that? We were, once upon a time, looking for alien life forms on planet Earth. And so we were at it, this was in the remote viewing unit. And so some of the stuff that we were coming up with was terrain-based again. So we were sketching, like silhouettes of mountains and things. And I've shared this story on Clubhouse before because the results were being presented to Fern Gavin, the branch chief, which was supposedly being bounced off of whoever his boss was, I think Dale Graft. And so we ended up being detailed, Mel Riley, Ed Dames, and myself. Ed Dames was a monitor, not a remote viewer. And I'm going to tell you that I really liked Ed Dames when I first met him because he was the guy that gave me my physics lectures in preparation for my coordinate remote viewing training. And he is a smart guy, speaks Mandarin Chinese. He's a physicist. His 2 children are physicists now, his 2 boys. And this whole Dr. Doom bullshit that he's, concocted now, even, Gary, one of my guys, said that he is right now, telling everybody that he's going to find a missing person in San Diego, and that he claims that he's given, the data to law enforcement, and if they don't react to it, he's going to come to San Diego, and with 4 or 5 hours work, he's going to tell everybody where this body is or where this person is. Well, that's just violates all the rules, right? Remote viewing is not 100% accurate, never has been, never will be. Never trust the results of a single remote viewer operating independently of other remote viewers. And remote viewing is not a standalone endeavor, which means it has to be done with working with law enforcement, etc. But still, that he has somewhere along the line gotten enough rise out of people that he does it that way. He says those things. He makes these outlandish, ridiculous predictions now. And I just want you to know that in the day that I knew him, he wasn't that kind of guy. I don't know what caused the transformation. Frustration, I guess. I don't know. Trying to draw a crowd, I guess. I don't know. It's just really bullshit these days. So, but back then, Mel Riley and Ed went as the operations officer with Mel Riley and I as kind of the remote viewers. And we went to the Abiquiu Inn is where we flew into Albuquerque, drove up to Santa Fe, and then we stayed at the Abiquiu Inn, which is out near George O'Keeffe's ranch. It's kind of, if you're looking at a map, it's kind of to the southwest of George O'Keeffe's ranch, the artist. And at the Abiquiu Inn, interestingly enough, we were out one night just kind of doing terrain matching, like looking at the silhouettes of the mountains against the silhouettes of what were being drawn by the viewers. And we found the match of the mountain, but this really funny thing happened as the three of us are standing out on this mound looking out over the country, and we could see, the moon behind this mountain. It gave us a perfect silhouette, and we're sketching that. And I mean, we were not sketching it, we were matching it to sketches. And so we said, yeah, that's it. That's got to be the mountain because it matches perfectly to what the viewers were sketching. And then we hear some voices behind us. We turn around and look, and it's Jacques Vallée, who's the big sci-fi writer, UFO writer. You guys probably know him. That was the first time I'd ever met him. And then the other guy is Ron Blackburn, who was a physicist at Lawrence Livermore Air Force Base. And he's a guy who told me, he's one of my remote viewing students, and he told me that he actually did see and work on or touch a gray. He told me that. Now, I don't know, Ron Blackburn was not the kind of guy that I would have looked at and said, well, he's just an exaggerative liar. I mean, he was a physicist working at Lawrence Livermore, and he really didn't gain anything by telling me that story. So I always took it with a grain of salt because I've heard that from a lot of people. But anyway, I just want to establish the bona fides of the guy who said that to me, that he's actually seen and touched one of the bodies, or a body, I don't know if there are lots of them or not very many. So Ron Blackburn is there with Jacques Vallée looking for, alien life forms. They're looking for UFOs and stuff. And Ron Blackburn has devised this little device that he's standing there with. It's got these, it looked like something out of Back to the Future, the professor there would have created. It's got stuff spinning around on it. It's got little, he's got little oscilloscope and little dials and needles hopping and popping, and he's looking for anomalous phenomenon that he could get a reading on his device with. I am not making this up. I mean, what a bizarre life I've had. I'm standing there, as after being a Ranger Company commander and being at, at the activity. Now I'm standing out here with this guy, with these guys out in Albuquerque, at the Abiquiu Inn in New Mexico. Long story short, the next night we decided we're going to head up to that mountaintop because the viewers had been describing stuff happening on this mountaintop. So we drive up, and we're driving up this road, and we're trying to find this turnoff that goes up to the top. And we drive up, we don't, we're going the wrong way now. So then we come back again. We get all the way back down again. We still can't find this thing. I mean, we're all feeling pretty stupid, especially me. I'm a ranger. I'm supposed to be really good at land nav, and I can't find this break in the road that goes up to the top. So we get back down to the bottom. We turn around and come back up again. And as we come back up, way off in the distance, old Eagle Eye Mel sees two guys walking. So we drive up to them because we were going to ask directions, but they're like 2 miles away on this road, or maybe a mile away. It just curves around. As we drive up there, we see these guys. They're both Native Americans. They both have really long, raven black hair, and they're quite, they're just quite brown. They've been out in the sun and they're doing whatever they're doing. But they both have pistols shoved into their belts, which is a little disconcerting, I have to say, because they're just walking down this mountain with no foreseeable, no evident transportation anywhere. They're walking down this mountain. But it's starting to get dark and it's starting to get cold. So Mel, who was a really, a big Native American enthusiast and lover, he goes, no, we got to stop and we got to, give them a ride down the mountain. Well, we did that. And when they got in the car, we gave them a couple of beers, and I was keeping my eyeball on the pistols. And we didn't get not 200 yards down the road, and these two Native Americans go, so what are you guys doing out here? You looking for UFOs? And we're like, shit, is it that obvious? And they go, no, a lot of people out here are looking for UFOs. But this is not where you want to go to see them. Really? Not on this mountain? Nah. All the shit that's happened up here happens way off over that way, or it happens back here at the City of the Dead. You want to go to the City of the Dead. City of the Dead. Sure enough, there's a place called the City of the Dead on a 1/50,000 map. So the next night, next afternoon, we've got groceries. We've got beer, we've got stuff to make sandwiches, and we're going to go up to this mountaintop because these Native Americans said, this is where you want to go to see UFOs and follow them. So we go up to the City of the Dead. Mel Riley about has a heart attack trying to climb up on the mountain. But we get up there, and then when we get there, we find this destroyed civilization. And we read up about it afterwards, and I'll just tell you that part of the story is this was one of the last holdout civilizations that fought against the Anasazi. And it ended its existence in this particular place, which is why it was called the City of the Dead. So it has a number of kivas. They're smaller than the Anasazi had, smaller population, I guess. But we each went into a kiva, and then we tried to do an extended remote viewing session. And we came back, and we were standing around the fire, briefing our results to each other, which were interesting, but nothing significant. We were really, our purpose was to kind of remote view the final days of this particular civilization. But as we're standing there kind of kicking a log that's burning, and we're watching all of the sparks go up into the sky, suddenly this bright light, like the light from lightning, only it is as straight as a ruler drawn on the sky, comes straight down out of the night sky. No long like entry tail or anything, just a giant bright light, almost like neon, but just really the brightness of lightning. It goes straight down over the peak of this mountain. And I grab my lensatic compass, and I take a heading to this thing from where I know I am. And I put it down on the 1/50,000s, and I draw a line. And it draws the line from the light to where we were standing, draw that line and extend it further, and it goes all the way over into Chaco Canyon. So we decided that Chaco Canyon was where we were going to go the next night. So long drive to that place. We find out that Chaco Canyon closes at night. So unless you're in a campsite, you can't be there. So we drive through an Indian reservation. And we drive through an Indian reservation. I think we had a Ford LTD, or maybe it was a Cadillac, but we're driving through an Indian reservation in a red Cadillac sedan, like a Seville or something that we rented. And it's just being beat to shit from the washboard roads and other things. And we get to where we are on the backside of Chaco Canyon, and we want to go to this place called, it's called the High Place, but it is actually the place where there's like a spoke of all the travel wheels that the Anasazi Nation used. Is kind of illustrated from that point. And it's the oldest part of the structures that are there in Chaco Canyon. But we just know that it's there because, we're looking at the 1/50,000s map, which is a military map. So we know we're not supposed to be there. So we pull the car off into the brush, and we cut tumbleweeds, and we cover this Cadillac in tumbleweeds. And then we start walking, and we go abreast, like about 10 meters apart, because we want to make sure that as we crest this hill that we are all three of us in a good position to see where we need to go next. So we just shot an azimuth, went up over the hill. We stayed on line, but we were each 10 meters apart. And we got to this one particular place, and I had a huge high pitch in my ear, to the point that I threw my hands up over my ears and went, oh my God. And Mel Riley, I looked over to my left. Mel had his hands up over his ears, and he says, did you just feel that? And then Ed, who's on the other side of him, is like, I think we just got scanned. So we all, it stops, and then we all just keep walking, and we don't get like 5 more steps, and it hits us again. And all 3 of us simultaneously are like, holy shit, geez, that hurts. We got scanned. So then we walk up to the top of the hill when it stops again, and we get up to the top of the hill. And just as we crest the hill, it happens the 3rd time. So all 3 of us simultaneously feeling it for exactly the same duration, this high-pitched whine in our heads, not outside. It was not an audible sign outside. It was just in our heads. So we look around. We're looking, what are we supposed to see here? What's here? Why were we drawn to this particular place? So there are all sorts of lights on the canyon walls, and all of that stuff has been explained away as escaping phosgene gas, and you name it, all those things. It's all been there, but people still who are ever at Chaco Canyon in the dark see these things. These mysterious lights appear in and out of, on the canyon walls, where it's not somebody overscaling a sandstone, canyon wall. It's just something happening there. It's an anomalous phenomenon that's occurring there that can be explained away if you want to, but in truth, none of the answers are really logical nor scientifically proven. But we then decide, after we've captured and we have made notes that are extensive notes that we're going to take back to the unit with us about this trip, we all 3 just lay down in a row on this wall. This wall is only about 4 feet high, and it's kind of a demolished old wall from the old civilization that was up at this place. And we just lay on it looking up into the sky above. And we're talking. Mel Riley's smoking a cigarette, but we're talking. And all of a sudden, straight above us, we see this opening in the sky. But it wasn't like an opening where there was darkness behind it. What we saw something that looked like cellophane in an irregular shape above us, because it was widening and it was widening and then shrinking and then widening and shrinking, like pulsing, but unevenly, not in sequence, but widening and then widening and then shrinking and widening and shrinking again. But it bent the light through it. It was like looking through crumpled cellophane as you look straight up. And it was there for minutes. And we were all 3 confirmed that each of us were seeing it. And we sketched it and we drew it, and each of us and how we perceived it. And then it just went away. And then we laid there for a couple more hours, and it happened again. Now, I think my perceptions of this was that it was some sort of a portal, an opening, and that it was opening and closing over this place, which would explain why the Anasazi Nation was locating itself there, because they were very warlike, but also very spiritual people. Sorry, I told you, hay fever. Thank you very much. Sorry I didn't mute my mic. Apologize for that. So, it would explain very much to me why the Anasazi Nation, that would be the seat of the Anasazi Nation, is because they would the men would spend literally the entire winter in the kivas, and the women would, prepare and send down food. But the men would be down there, and they would be there communing with what? I mean, let's face it. How many guys can get together in a kiva and spend the entire winter there, right, without killing each other, and actually be there doing something constructive, whether it was communing with whatever was above them, whatever dimensional, portal or entity, or something else was coming in and out of there. It was just a fascinating experience, and we ultimately, when we came back and briefed it, we ended up getting authorization to go back out there at least three more times, and we did. And each time we went, it was the same 3 of us doing it. And, we kept getting deeper and deeper and more understanding about this place. And our conclusions were, and what we briefed was that it was a dimensional portal. It was an opening that was there, and that it was the reason that this First Nation community had established itself there, and why their religious practices were so extreme. Men in the kivas for an entire winter, while food was just sent down and waste pulled out, kind of thing. They would stay down there communing with whatever and receiving information, sufficient information that it allowed them during that time, which was quite some time ago, to be able to cross-navigate clear down into South America, and they navigated by using towers and with burning fuel on the top of them, and they would navigate from tower to tower to tower, and they traded with what were probably Incans or Mayans, and certainly Mayans, and quite possibly the Incans. So it was a fascinating study, and just a culture, and why a culture would be around a place that was so magical as Chaco Canyon.
Dave, a quick question for you on that. So what was the original point that you found, the mountains that you all sketched? What were those called?
I'd have to look it up.
Okay.
It was a single mountain, but I'd have to look at the map again. I've forgotten the name of it. It was a very tall mountain that's right next to the Abiquiu Inn. If you're looking at a map of the Abiquiu Inn, the mountain is to the southwest, and so it's several miles to the southwest, and it's a very large mountain with a very, very high peak. But it has timber it has timber up to most of it. I think there's probably 100, 200, 300 meters of non-timber above the timber line. So if that gives you some evidence of what it is, and I apologize, I can't remember the name of it, but it was because we were supposed to be looking for alien civilizations on planet Earth. That was what the feedback was. After we had come up what we came up with, we were given that feedback. Okay, this was the tasking. Find alien civilizations or access to alien civilizations that might be on this planet. And then we were like, oh, well, shit, we need to go then. We need to let us go so we can actually walk the ground, take pictures, look at the sketches and determine this. And the authorization was given for us to do that. So that was the reason we found this place and went there.
So just to clarify, I'm pretty sure that Chaco Canyon is a place I've stumbled across and researched a long time ago as it pertains to having some type of a resonance or some type of like a hum or a sound that can be heard, that people who are there or something say that there is a frequency, and it has to do with, I guess, the magnetism of that area. I'm pretty sure it's the same place based on the story you're telling. As it pertains to places like this, though, and let's say, other sacred places around the world, i.e. the pyramids in particular, and places that are, built upon ley lines, when it comes to the remote viewing and all the work that you've done, is there any significance? Is there any application of these natural energy currents within the planet that you guys use when working with this? Or is there a way that it amplifies any of these practices or communication or anything therein in your experience?
Yeah, no experience with it amplifying or improving or do anything like that. But, ancient civilizations on our planet and on other planets, they go to certain places because there's a reason. And it's not just because it can grow potatoes or corn. They go to a place because it feeds them first in a spiritual perspective or some knowledge perspective, and then all else really kind of comes later than that. Although I know that there are a lot of individuals who would say, no, that's not true. They go where the food is first, and then but that's just not it's not what's been proven. What's been proven archaeologically is when you're looking at something, it's not necessarily the evidence of a presence of food as much as it is an evidence of the presence of energy or the presence of something that drew them there from a spiritual or metaphysical perspective, that's what brought them there. And then while there, in Peru in particular, they took what was really rather uninhabitable and unhospitable, and certainly not agrarian oriented, but built and terraced and irrigated and created what they wanted to feed themselves, sustain themselves. But they were drawn to these places because of the spirit of them. Something was there. Now, I will also say that when we first took remote viewers to Peru, that we were being guided there by a friend, Jorge Luis Delgado, who is a shaman. And we would go there and run around all over the place in Peru to all these different shamanic, spiritual places that Jorge would bring us to. And I mean, yeah, we were front loaded, but what I would do is I would not let Jorge explain to anybody yet what this particular place was. But we would then just give a tasking to all the remote viewers. I would assign a coordinate to it to allow them to lock into the gestalt of that place. And then everybody would just split up. And we would go off into some place, and find a quiet place. And everybody would go into an altered state and just start sketching, what they saw this place to be in its beginning or why it was there, kind of thing. And virtually every one of these cases, whatever the viewers would produce was always accurate according to the explanation given by the shaman about why they believe shamanically or historically why the original peoples were in these places, why they came here, the great battles that ensued, and why those battles ensued in those particular places, because they were protecting, the
David,
spirit of this place.
You're
Yes.
breaking something. Move a little, or you want ahead?
I am. You were breaking up
Yeah,
to me.
Nate, you were
bad.
breaking up really bad.
Yeah,
Maybe it's yours.
It's really today.
Yeah, Nate, you're breaking up, brother.
Yeah. Wait. Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you clearly too. Yeah, I don't know. It must have been the app. The app's been incredibly glitchy all day long. We experienced this in rooms earlier today. And my friend Alyssa down there's room, who we see. So yeah, sorry, you were breaking up bad. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose anything of what you're saying. Please continue.
Yeah, we were just talking about the fact that we were, everybody looks at the viewers were looking at these things, coming up with these concepts and perceptions about what they saw there in these places, the great battles, why these great battles that were wiping out certain segments of the population. And Jorge would stand up as the shaman and say, well, here's the history of this place. And it was always interesting to see, how much of that correlated to what the viewers had perceived about these places. These battles occurred there, not over, again, typically, not over the availability of food stores or food stores or the ability to grow something. But battles happened in these particular places because of the spiritual significance of them. And the spiritual significance of them, according to, Jorge, a shaman from there, are that, these were places where they had access to other worlds, to other civilizations, to other peoples, to other knowledge. And that was one of the reasons that they were there. And they would come there to that place for that reason, and then they would develop it. And when they would come to that place for that reason, often when the battles ensued, the battles were not over, how much corn they had stored. The battles were there to come and to take over this power place that this other tribe or this other people were there. So that starts to lend some credence to this theory that, the indigenous people come to these places because they are aware of these other worlds, these other civilizations, these other knowledges, these other places for knowledge, and that's why they come to these places. If there indeed is a portal above, Chaco Canyon, then that's a reason why the Anasazi Nation would establish its hub there and then go from that place outward to trade and to build their commerce, right? They were also a very brutal people, though. They were also, there was even evidence of cannibalism there, where they would, eat those that they conquered or enslaved. But, that's not unusual about anything that we've seen in, the origins of this planet and humanity on this planet. So I don't actually see that as a negative towards them. Some do. I don't. I just see it as That's where we were in the human condition at that particular point in time. But that's how we got to that place. I mean, we started off with I guess about 5 or 6 people sketching a particular mountain that nobody knew the answer to, and then the analysis was it's probably this mountain, and then the comparison was it's exactly this mountain, and then that took us to that mountain, and then that took us to those 2 Indians that we picked up, and that took us to the City of the Dead, and that took us to Chaco and to a portal that we witnessed opening both in day and night above ourselves over the hours that we stayed there. So, and then went back many more times to witness it and to document it as best we could.
So here's to keep on this track, I guess, as far as discussing particular significant events as it pertains to your work with remote viewing. Obviously, the centering around the phenomena is a very important part. And within that, though, because you talked about remote viewing, obviously places on Mars and canyons up there, the tunnels in particular. As many people who've dived into ufology, and especially as we're talking about Chaco Canyon and a lot of these original Native American tribes that have been throughout the United States, and India, other cultures around the
all
world,
over the world,
reference essentially these underground people, like these underground races. Some of them in Hindu is like serpents. That's where we get, I think, the idea of reptilians. But that there are these civilizations that are under earth, this whole idea of hollow earth and all this stuff that a lot of people are familiar with. But a lot of these cultures, especially in the United States and Mexico, Incas and Aztecs, have referenced these type of things in these tunnels and these places. Same in Peru. There's a tribe there in the Amazon that believes, that says there is a tunnel that takes 2 weeks walk that they can, that you basically to the center of the earth or to this, this expanded city or place. Within the remote viewing, was this ever anything that was explored by you or by any other groups to access places within our own planet, whether under the ocean or within any type of a hollow earth kind of concept?
Well, I can tell you that no hollow earth concept was ever produced by any of the remote viewers. That doesn't prove or disprove it, but I can just say that these underground tunnels that were engineered, those have been seen by remote viewers. Those were seen by 2 separate classes of like 50 remote viewers that I took to Peru in 2 subsequent years, back in the 90s. No, back in the back in the 90s. No, I'm sorry. It was after the war started. So, took them down there, and Jorge, the shaman, said he validated that. He was the guy, that was supposed to provide the feedback for them based on what they said. So every student would stand up and say, to the whole class, my perceptions of the target were this. And then after everybody had done that, then, which takes some time, over an hour with 50 students or 45 students. And then Jorge would say, well, here's the feedback. Here's what actually we believe happened here. Now, he confirmed on multiple occasions that there were, in fact, tunnels that ran from Peru up into North America and beyond. There were other tunnels that were there. But that, because I asked to see the tunnels, and he directed me to some books where there are some pictures of the tunnels, but the tunnels are, in many cases, most cases, they're collapsed in various places. And in some places, according to him, they go deep enough that they actually have a lot of water in them. And in other places, poison gases have pooled in the low points in these tunnels. And so, at least in Peru, they will not allow, full-on exploration of the tunnels. So I don't know Jorge, again, is one of these guys. He had no reason to lie about it or to embellish it. He was talking about it. And I know that I have seen photographs of these tunnels, at least, several of them. And I also know that in everything that I've ever read, that what he said was correct. that some of them were the Peruvian governments or the Mexican governments will not allow people to explore them because if they explore, they have and they get killed down in there or they get lost down in there, then that government's responsible for trying to go find them. So they won't allow the exploration of it, beyond what they know is stable and allows somebody to go and take pictures of it. So there are pictures of these tunnels. There are pictures of them out there, and I'm sure that there's probably been a documentary done on them. If you just look, I don't know what the name of it was, but I'm sure that I've seen one, in the past 20 years somewhere where somebody was, taking a picture of these and showing that these were, in fact, these were not something that was being done by people with, basic hand tools. These were things that were being built that have, right angles in them, and or they have consistent rounding of the upper corners, which strengthen the corner and strengthen the roof, and allow more of it to be supported by the wall when they're rounded. But they weren't rounded like you would expect them to be rounded by somebody if in fact they were just using crude stone hand tools. In fact, they had to be metal that was significantly strong enough or rigid enough and to be sharpened to be able to chisel something, and then they had to have an ability to polish this stuff because they didn't have tool marks in it. And I've seen the photographs of them. So I'm certain they exist, and according to Jorge, they do exist, and that they are just in a state of real disrepair because they've been in existence for thousands of years. So yeah, I mean, these civilizations built using, and there again too, if you go to Peru and you look at the stuff that's in Peru and you look at some of the things that are in Peru and you look at, how stuff is built and how it's put together and the tonnage that they estimate many of the stones to be, that there hasn't ever been really logical explanations for where it was quarried and how it got to this place and how it was lowered into position. And, the vast, the kind of the main line of thought about the Incan civilization is they claim they didn't even have the wheel. So if you're going to claim they don't have the wheel and stick by that, then how do you explain banked roads, in the jungles that they've uncovered? They have banked roads, banked corners, engineered corners in them. So you got to really be hopping along in your Huarache sandals to need banked turns in these roads, or you must have some really fast mules or something that you're riding. I don't know. There's just so many things that make no sense. I mean, obviously some of the pillars and other stuff like that they've been turned on a lathe. Well, if you can turn something on a lathe in order to make it that precise as those are, within thousandths of an inch in some cases, thousands of an inch between pillar after pillar after pillar after pillar. Well, that's preposterous to say that can exist in a civilization that didn't have the wheel. You know what I mean? So it's just stupidity that's out there for whatever reason, but it makes no sense to what we've found as remote viewers. It makes no sense to what we've actually found as even just archaeologists to look at that kind of stuff and make those kinds of claims. Of course it had to be, they had the wheel, and of course that they understood engineering. The question, I guess, is how did they learn all of that? Where did it come from? It didn't come from Spanish invasion. So, this was stuff that existed before they'd ever even seen a horse or a ship, of the size of a Spanish galleon anyway. So where did that kind of knowledge come from? Did it just, pop out of the sky? No pun intended. Is it something that they gained access to through their experience of living where they lived? There is nothing to support that evidence. Nothing in the written record. Nothing in even the carved record to support that. So the speculation is that that knowledge to do that, to learn to do that, to be capable of doing that, came from elsewhere. I mean, I guess it's possible you could say that it's part of the collective unconscious, and they gleaned it from there. That's certainly doable for me in my mind, but I've never seen too many examples. I've never seen any examples where, the global mind, the collective unconsciousness, the 100 monkey effect, where it in fact, empowers science on that level. I mean, I've seen, simple knowings and simple understandings based on the theories and the experimentation of it, but we're talking about the possibility, and I expect it is a possibility, that a knowledge for how to construct was passed from European humanity to these ancient civilizations that were, in the Americas. It's a possibility.
What's interesting within that is it's a subject that we've discussed many times, in this room when talking about essentially the reevaluating our own history on this planet through the lens of knowing that extraterrestrial life is here, it's been here, looking at psychedelic influence and cultures, books like The Immortality Key by Brian Marescu, if you've heard of it, it's absolutely fascinating and phenomenal, came out last year. That if we're looking at these ancient structures and these ancient civilizations that achieve these wonders that we still can't really replicate at all today, I mean, i.e. the pyramids, and if we did, it would be the height of our ingenuity and resource to even be able to come close, and I still don't think we could. And so you look back and this is where the ancient aliens, hypothesis comes in of whether or not this information, this knowledge was given to past civilizations from, an intelligent off-world being, whether or not this were the new iteration of an evolution, meaning after the last younger Dryas, that the civilization that was there on Earth was evolved in a completely different way as far as intellectually in harmony with the planet, understanding consciousness fully, and creating these things essentially to leave a lasting monument of, what they had achieved and who they were. And then the reset button hit on this planet. And as people like Randall Carlson, who's one of the foremost geologists in the world, discusses that there's 125, I think, extinction level events that have happened in the past. 13 extinction level events that have happened in the past 125,000 years. And so either you have an intelligent civilization that existed before and achieved great things and was wiped out, either left world, whatever the case may have been, or that you have this intelligent intervention, or you have people similar to yourself, ancient cultures, teachings through, these psychedelic rituals and shamanism, work with deep states of meditation and altered consciousness, we're able to tap into a certain knowledge and understanding and create these things. And and especially in the Western world, we've lost these capabilities and ascribed them to, woo-woo or new aginess and pseudoscience that is ultimately not to be taken seriously. But at some point in time, it was. And I think that basically those three hypotheses of, theories, whatever you want to call them, I guess, based on the information, seem to be of the most logical and credible, is that the reset button hit and we're the new evolutionary chain, and we're quite destructive in our nature and are destroying the planet, are not in harmony with it in many ways, or it was given to us by higher intelligence, or we tapped into, that infinite knowledge that is within the universe through these altered states of consciousness and got those downloads from there. And so I'm not sure what your full stance is on that, but those seem to be the three that we kick around the most as being, the most logical or holding the most water, knowing what we know now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think all three are possible, and what I am very comfortable in understanding and knowing is that if humanity were to die out, which is the path we're headed down, and it's really disconcerting to me, but if that were to happen to us, in 1,000 years, there'd be no evidence of what we were. There just wouldn't. People think there would be. There wouldn't. It would be, it would all go away. All of the structures, all of the glass, all of the steel. In 1,000 years, it would be rust and dust, and back again. Might be something that somebody might dig up and look at a piece of glass or a piece of stainless steel or something like that and wonder where it came from or what it is, right? But yeah, we could be gone just as these other civilizations have been gone. And then people will make of it what we were. They'll decide based on what they can dig up, what they can look at and hold. They'll decide what it meant. They'll decide what we were about. They'll decide what stupid things we did, what powerful things we did, what spiritual things we did. And that's what's going to happen unless we learn to stabilize ourselves and continue to write our own collective history. Somewhere down the line, somebody's going to be writing it for us. We have really screwed the pooch on a lot of things, and this life is, part of our human condition. And it is only ignorance that somebody would step up and beat their chest and say, you're just blowing an alarm that doesn't need to be blown because look at how perfect it all is. It's not. And I think you know that. And I think most people in this group probably know that. So I'm concerned about that and where it's going to be. And if you really study what's going on in the planet, I mean, really study, not conspiracy theory, but just look at the science of what's happening and look at, the constant disregard for anything that makes any sense just for money. I mean, just like in the Soviet Union, Soviet Union. I keep saying, the Cold War's back again. If you follow what's happening in Russia, I mean, singing the communist national anthem again, and the weapons are being built up again, and so we're going to be back in a Cold War again, and that's a little disconcerting to me. It's very disconcerting to me. I recently heard a story about a guy, Alexander. I'm sorry. It was Petrov, Stanislav Petrov. You guys familiar with him?
No.
Stanislav Petrov. Most of you were not alive during the day, but on September 23rd, 1983, exactly 30 days before we invaded Grenada, Stanislav Petrov was a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Force who was manning, he was the combat controller commander at a missile defense site. And their responsibility was to watch the West Coast. He was on the east coast of the Soviet Union, and they were watching the West Coast of the United States. And I understand there's a documentary out there about it and everything else now. But when I was debriefed on it many, many, many moons ago, I heard about this guy who had done this amazing thing, and I was really interested in why he did this amazing thing. And let me tell you the story. So he's there. He's got all of his missile crews on watch. They are these people that he call algorithmists, which are, they're mathematicians that recalculate everything that the computer is telling them. And I don't know what the sequencing was on this, but I know that they received a missile alert. That a missile, intercontinental ballistic missile, a Minuteman missile, had been launched by the United States from the West Coast, headed their direction. And so they brought in all the algorithmists to reconfirm that this missile had in fact been launched, and everybody said 100% accurate, it's validated, missile was launched. So he was asking for visual confirmation, as I read, and visual confirmation could not be done because we were right at a transition point in the continent of the United States where we were East Coast dark, West Coast twilight, and so it made it difficult for them to perceive thermal imagery to perceive the missile launch. But so the reaction given back when he asked for visual confirmation was, we can neither confirm nor divine or deny the missile launch. So the protocol is that if the visual can't be confirmed or denied, that you follow the protocol. If the computer says a missile was launched and the algorithmists who have checked the code have said it's 100% accurate, a missile was launched, you're supposed to call the next higher headquarters and say, missile launch from West Coast United States, fire the counter missile or missiles. In essence, the protocol said thermonuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States should have been begun. Well, while he was pondering this and demanding more data from the visual representatives, another missile alert happened. 5 missile alerts came to him in the space of, an hour and a half, okay? 5 separate, confirmed, 100% accurate missile alerts came to him during this time. And he said in his explanation that was given in his debrief was that something inside him, something that was beyond the physical in him, something that he did not know where it came from, guided him toward not following the protocol. He refused to accept what the computer was saying to him. He refused to accept what, Moscow was calling him and going, "Why, we know that there are missiles inbound." And he refused to give the order to launch. And he was the guy that had to give the order to launch. That was his position. And he said, nobody can override me. Nobody's going to question me. But there's something within me that is telling me, something beyond the physical in me, telling me that there's something wrong here. And this man wrote it out all the way until he said, "I'm going to wait for surface radar confirmation," which by the time surface radar would have detected the first Minuteman, right, it would have been over their heads, basically. So it would have been, we would have had a first strike thermonuclear attack. But something inside of him that he was never able to explain just because of, he wanted to be a spiritual man, but the Soviet Union didn't allow him necessarily to be a spiritual man, not in that way. But he knew that something spoke to him, something guided him outside of himself not to do that. And this relates back to this gift, this natural ability that all of us have, that still small voice inside of ourselves. When it speaks, we must listen. Now, even people, in this case, something so traumatic, potentially traumatic, right? That voice spoke to him. Don't do it. Don't do it. And he honored that. Through 5 missile alerts, he was, if he had just said the word, the United States and the Soviet Union would have been involved in a thermonuclear exchange, which would have, just to give you some scale, right? If you take a Minuteman missile, I think the Minuteman missile warhead, if you took that Minuteman missile warhead and compared that to the combined destructive force of every bomb dropped, including Nagasaki and Hiroshima, but every bomb dropped during World War II, that one Minuteman missile, I think it says that it would be 3,000 times more than what all of the combined bombing plus Nagasaki and Hiroshima. That is what one Minuteman missile is capable of doing. We have thousands of them still, thousands of them. And so do they. And so does China, And so these are huge concerns now, but here we came to this particular point that 5 nuclear missiles were confirmed launch, and he followed that still small voice inside of himself, this piece of him that is connected to beyond the physical, that we all are, that we all have, right? And because of that, he basically stopped the thermonuclear war. And he died in 2017, but what an amazing story, right? Of a guy, and they went back and checked the computer for months. They tried to figure out what was wrong with the code, what caused it to happen, and there was absolutely no explanation ever arrived at. They could not figure out why it did that. But it didn't do it just once. It did it 5 separate times throughout the night.
It's funny you brought that up. I didn't recognize the guy by the name, but that story 100%. I think in an interview, it might have been through the Stars Academy of Arts and Stuff, their 2-part documentary series they did with Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon and all them, where they discussed that exact same thing. I couldn't remember the guy's name, but one of the most incredible stories.
We should have had a fucking ticker tape parade.
Yeah.
I mean, there should have been a ticker tape parade with that guy. He should have been honored in every nation on this planet for what he did by following that still small voice. No, defying, and he was actually demoted for having done that.
What's his name?
Stanislav Petrov. Stanislav Petrov. Yeah, he was demoted for having done that.
I think the that's the premise of the movie War Games, if I'm not mistaken, right? The one from the 80s, or like that was the
It
inspiration.
was not known. It wasn't known in the 80s. It would actually was not. The fact that it actually happened was not actually released until post-Soviet Union. So that would have been like 91. So it wasn't released until 10 years later, as I understand. So it would actually like 93 is when it was released and it came out. So, I mean, War Games was just about a computer running amok and doing it on purpose, right? Because it had become self-aware or misunderstood its role. But I get where you're going with it. Yeah, it's similar, but I don't think anybody, I know nobody knew about it because it was classified in the Soviet Union. They weren't going to share that, the fact that something like that had happened, especially after they went back and looked at their computers and went, we can't figure out why it told us that, why we don't know what the glitch was. But can you imagine? I mean, what if that ever happened again? Are we going to have somebody that's as, connected and trusting of that still small voice, that, that piece of them that is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, eternal, that we all are those beings. We all are that. We all have that ability, as did he on that night. And despite everything he had been taught to do, he chose to listen to that. He chose to understand that there was a higher piece of him saying, don't do this. That would have ended us all.
Dr. Morehouse, we have officially hit a top of the hour at hour 4. So before I reset the room, what I want to do is check with you first and foremost. I think we're at a point that I'm going to open the questions first to my moderators, who I know have been eagerly waiting this time with you, and then we'll start bringing some people up who've been very patiently waiting for hand now. I'll do my best to go in order with those who are waiting. But I want to make sure that before I do this reset, is there anything that you think is pertinent that you haven't covered yet as it pertains to the remote viewing, your work with it? Anything that you think is just, hey, this is a gem, and I didn't really have a chance to dive into it yet, that you feel led to, it might come out in the question portion, but is there anything that you want to say first and foremost?
Well, let me just brush on those two questions you and I discussed, which was, one was the Gateway program, and then the other would be just psychedelics.
Yeah.
Really quick. So I had two of these two things, which they're not big pet peeves of mine. They're just things that, when we get into the remote viewing forum, and we're talking there, I want to stick to the very strict parameters of what we're talking about there, which is talking about remote viewing as a tool for human empowerment, for transitioning people from believing to knowing. So let me explain to you about the Gateway program, because I know that there are some documents that were released in that trove by the CIA titled the Gateway, experience, or, an analysis of the Gateway experience by, CIA. Actually, it wasn't the CIA doing the analysis. It's just that the CIA, is at the top of the page. Because if you look at, like, one of them published on 9 June 1983, it has a proof of release, CIA RPD 96, and the rest of the number. But it's actually a department of the Army, U.S. Army Operational Group, U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, Fort G.G. Meade, Maryland, 20755, right? So now, and it's subject analysis and assessment of the Gateway process. Now, I've had a lot of people coming up, in the remote viewing forum and saying, oh, well, there's a declassified document talking about the Gateway process. And so did you guys use that in remote viewing? No. And let me explain why. Two of kind of the original guys in the remote viewing program, along with Mel Riley and a couple of other people, were Joe McMonagle, Skip Atwater, and of course Mel Riley. Mel Riley was actually the first man to ever, I think his viewer number was 03, but he was the first man to ever do an actual remote viewing mission for the U.S. government. Joe McMonagle was viewer number 01, but Mel Riley was the guy to do the first remote viewing session. Now, in Joe McMoneagle and Skip Atwater. Skip Atwater was an operations guy and was a monitor. He was not a remote viewer. He was trained in remote viewing, but they make a decision, just like they did with Ed Dames, at some point in time that based on your role there or your abilities as a remote viewer, you're not going to serve as a remote viewer. You're going to be a monitor. Now, that pisses guys off that want to be remote viewers if they're told you're going to be a monitor. So there's always some kind of animosity there. But Skip and Joe McMoneagle were really good friends. And Joe McMoneagle was over with Robert Monroe, who was the founder of the HemiSync programs, which the Gateway process came from. And then Joe McMoneagle fell in love with Robert Monroe's daughter and married Robert Monroe's daughter. And when he retired from the Army, he went to work there to kind of pick it up from her father, who was getting aged at that time and eventually passed away. And, Joe McMoneagle was now the main dude there. Skip Atwater went there with Joe McMoneagle to be the operations officer. And so they took what existed there and were steadily trying to modernize it and, do other things with it. But the Gateway stuff was kind of already there. So what you're seeing here is Skip and particularly Joe were trying to get the remote viewing unit to buy into the HemiSync product because it would have been money, a big, huge cash infusion into the Monroe Institute if they could have gotten that to happen. So what you see here in this 9 June 83 document is you've got a guy by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDowell, Commander Dat-O, and he is providing an assessment of the Gateway process to the commander of the U.S. Army Operational Group at Fort Meade. The U.S. Army Operational Group, that's the unit, the remote viewing unit that I was in, and that Joe was in, and Skip was in, and Dames was in, and Gabrielle, and and Mel Riley, and Paul Smith, and Angela, and Robin, and Lynn Buchanan. We were all part of that. So of that particular group. So you've just got a guy, an Army guy, doing an analysis on it, sending it back to another Army guy, saying, yeah, it's interesting and good stuff. It's got some good stuff, but probably, maybe not for us, for a number of different reasons. But, but I'm not going to say I'm the final word on this. I'm just telling you that as it is, not specifically valid for what we want to do. Now, here's the truth of it is that the Gateway programs they had some of this stuff at the remote viewing unit, but it was never, ever, ever used in the remote viewing unit. Never used. It was not part of our cool down. It was not part of the process. It was not part of anything. So what you're looking at is just the fact that the guys that went to the Monroe Institute that married into it were trying to get a contract. So they were trying to get, the unit to buy into this. So there were a few of the tapes laying around, and I picked up the Outbounders and the other stuff, and I used them because I liked it, that it was a yogic relaxation, breath meditation, and it relaxed me to go to sleep at night. But it didn't ever induce an out-of-body experience, but it induced some pretty bizarre dreams, I'll tell you that. But when I went back to, when I was in the unit working, I used a Greater New England Academy of Hypnosis cool-down CD, or cool-down cassette tape at that time. And I used that because the unit sent me to Geneva, to the Greater New England Academy of Hypnosis. It's hard to say fast. And I went there for a week and, was trained to put myself into an altered state of consciousness there using that. So that's what I used for cool down. Paul Smith he listened to heavy metal rock music. That's how he cooled down. I know Mel would listen to Indian. He liked to listen to the man. the outcome. It was not part of the intelligence product, and I hope that explains it to you. So it's not remote viewing. It's not part of remote viewing. It was explored, but it was not used in remote viewing. And go ahead.
So within that, though, and obviously you're very familiar with the document in which we're speaking, there's a lot of incredible information that is in there as far as the scientific backing in physics and quantum physics, and talking about the absolute, if you will, the God source, the higher consciousness, that frequency. As far as the information that is given in there, because most of it is explanation, is background into the research. Did that stand up? Was that essentially backed by everything that you guys had learned and explored and found to be true within that, versus the technique, the hemisync, as far as the protocol you didn't use, but as far as the information that is in that report itself and the explanation of all these things and the holographic universe and everything that was dove into, do you subscribe to that? Is there anything within that you disagreed with, or that was not backed by your findings or the findings of the actual Project Stargate themselves? Or if you can recall it, I'm not sure if.
Yeah, I mean, look, in paragraph 1, Itzhak Bentov. Okay, just about every quantum physicist today, or physics researcher, or anybody dealing with physics of consciousness and those kinds of things, they all started by reading Itzhak Bentov, published it in the 70s, and so it was like a well-known publication that people were using to again, as I said to you early on, we borrow from physics, and we use quantum mind. So Itzhak Bentov was this Jewish physicist who wrote this really amazing, book called "Stalking the Wild Pendulum." That was the book that's here. They're quoting, Itzhak Bentov, but the book is a little paperback called "Stalking the Wild Pendulum." You can probably still find it out there, but I read that I read that when I was in high school, before I went off to college. And it was a motivational thing to me at that time to see the world in a different way, because he goes through entrainment, he goes through stuff that I teach in remote viewing, and I teach it because he did a perfect job of describing certain things that help us understand how we are able to perceive in remote viewing. He came up with this concept of, frequency is everything and everything is frequency, kind of a thing. So, we're all just raisins in the jello. So if there's one raisin in the jello that's moving at a higher frequency with a higher amplitude, more cycles per second, and a higher, stronger signal, then it's going to vibrate the jello, and all of the other raisins around that one raisin are going to vibrate at the same frequency as that raisin, right? Okay, now skip the jello mold concept and just apply it to the human condition. And it's saying that if there's a certain element of humanity that is operating at a certain frequency, whether that's positive or negative, that if they have a high enough frequency, enough cycles per second, and a high enough amplitude, that they're going to cause other elements or around them in this global society to start vibrating at the same frequency. So if it's a bad negative thing, then you get more and more people entrained to that negative. It's called sympathetic resonance, into that frequency and that way of thinking and that way of operating and performing. You can also look at it from a spiritual perspective. You could say, okay, well, you have a involved in prayer, and if the intent of that prayer is a replication of or described by the amplitude of the frequency, and the frequency of the prayer is over and over and over again, many, many cycles, then that prayer could cause a sympathetic resonance with a given percentage of population that was in training with that. He went on to describe other kinds of things which were really unique but are real, like there's a negative charge on the surface of the planet, a negative ionic charge on the surface of the planet. 80 kilometers out, at the beginning of the first level of the ionosphere, there is a positive charge, ionic charge, at the first level of the ionosphere, 80 kilometers out. And he actually established, I can't remember exactly, but it was like there is a calibrated increase for every 1,000 feet out, or every 1 kilometer out to the 80 kilometers.